and has the power to go at a moment's notice. This fire season, you're the hero. We are Ready Nevada County.
Nevada County has a new tool to make evacuations safer and more efficient in the event of an emergency. This new tool is called Zone Haven, and we need you to know your zone.
In order to know your zone, you need to go to community.zonehaven.com, type in your address. Once your address populates in the pop-up window, take that information and write down the zone that is given to you where you know you'll find it in case of emergency.
Zone Haven and knowing your zone does not replace Nixle and/or Code Red. It actually supplements them, and it makes those tools more powerful because you'll know what zones are being evacuated or which ones are being placed on advisory. And as a result, you won't have to do anything else other than listen to those messages and know if it's time to go.
Even if you don't have internet, this could be done by word of mouth, it can be done by radio, or it could be us driving down the street, so please know your zone.
From Truckee to Lake of the Pines, from Chicago Park to Spenceville. Every single square mile of Nevada County has a zone. And having a zone that you know for your neighborhood is going to help you save time to be able to evacuate and keep you and your family safe.
Ready Nevada County is an education campaign designed to help the public have successful outcomes during emergency events. We really focus on a whole host of disasters or emergency events. We want to have a broad spectrum. We want to be prepared for anything, but really we focus a lot on wildfire because we know that's one of the most likely events to happen in Nevada County.
Ready, Set, Go is really built around the wildfire premise to prepare residents to be ready before an event, to move into the set posture when there's a red flag or a fire is near you, and then to go when it's time to go.
Essentially, in its simplest form, it's a three-tiered community emergency preparedness plan.
I have lived in this house, which we built, my husband and I, 26 years ago now, actually. We selected the hardy plank, the concrete siding, and also the metal roof. Then when we moved up here and heard about the 49er fire, that's when we started to say, wow, this really is even more important than we first realized.
So the 49er fire is one of the most historic fires in Nevada County's history. They figured it changed the laws of the state of California that said this is how you have to protect your home. That came out of Nevada County.
Steve Eubanks came from the Fire Safe Council, and the main thing we needed to pay attention to was the ladder fuels. Planting has been removed from the edges of the house so that it does not touch the house. It was an incredible service from the Fire Safe Council to come out and spend a couple of hours going through this property.
So the ready phase is when there's no immediate threat to you and your family. This is the time when you should be doing education and planning, whether that be training, educating yourself, or accumulating equipment, hardening your home, creating defensible space.
Defensible space is really all about creating a buffer zone between your house and flammable vegetation. We really focus on defensible space around the home, that first 100 feet, but also around the roadway too. Another aspect of the ready phase is hardening the home, and really what that means is making your home more resilient to wildfire.
That's going to be putting the fine-grained mesh around the vents of your home so that embers won't get under your house or into the eaves of your house. That's going to be using non-combustible materials on your deck and around your home. So when an ember storm comes through, it's not going to ignite your home itself.
I currently live here in Grass Valley with my parents. All of us have sleep apnea, so we all have CPAP machines that require power in order to run.
I also use a nebulizer, and that's used to disperse medication that I need to give myself.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to call our meeting to order. Daryl, would you mind leading us in the pledge? Go ahead. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any corrections or deletions to the agenda?
There are no corrections or deletions, Chair.
Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a special meeting. We're excited today to hold our Nevada County proposed budget hearing. Today we'll have 3 timed public hearing notices for 3 separate budgets. And because this is a special meeting just for the budget, we will not be holding general public comment for items not on the agenda. Public comment, however, will be taken at each hearing for each of the items considered at this time. All right, so at this time, we're going to begin with item number 1, a public hearing for the purpose of hearing written and oral comments from the public concerning the proposed final budget for fiscal year 2025-2026, totaling approximately $415,450,450.64. And I will turn it over to Allison, who's going to open it, and turn it over to Aaron after that.
Great. Thank you, Chair Hall, members of the board, and thank you to the public who attended today for our public hearing. We're very appreciative that you're here to participate. Aaron Mettler, our Deputy CEO, Chief Fiscal Officer, is going to be spearheading the presentation today. I want to recognize her work, especially her community outreach and communication, taking a very complex budget and communicate to the public in a very tangible way. I also like to take the opportunity to recognize our budget analysts, Sarah Hollyhead and Barry Anderson, for their work. They start this work in the fall, and it's accumulation of many long nights and weekends, so I want to recognize that and thank you. And then lastly, Ben Finley, who is a Skill Bridge intern who came to our office about 6 months ago and had added great value to the budget as well. So thank you, Ben. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Allison, and good morning, Chair and Board of Supervisors. Aaron Mettler, your Deputy CEO and Chief Fiscal Officer, here today to present the Nevada County 2025-26 proposed budget. I'm going to start with an overview of the priority objectives. These are key areas of interest to the Board of Supervisors that are discussed and determined in January at the board workshop and then voted on at a board meeting in February. These objectives don't necessarily change from year to year. However, the planned activities underneath each one are dynamic, and some roll on and some roll off, and new ones come forward. But fiscal stability and core services is really the primary objective, certainly my primary objective as your CFO, and the primary objective of today's presentation. However, fiscal stability and core services isn't the only thing that we do here in Nevada County. We're also keenly interested in emergency preparedness, in economic development, in how to further broadband infrastructure within the county, in developing affordable housing, addressing homelessness, and adding to our recreation amenities, as well as maintaining some climate resilience. And so each of these key areas are filtered throughout the budget presentation from all the departments. In their budget narratives, you will see identification of where they are looking towards priority objective activities, accomplishments, and where they're dedicating funding to these 8 key areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about the budget overview, and before we dive into the details, I want to make sure to set some context for what we're going to hear today. Other municipalities in California are struggling, and we're not alone in that. However, I think we are better positioned to weather that struggle. A lot of what's going on throughout California includes higher liabilities in terms of insurance costs, higher debt service costs, as well as lower revenues as we experience some economic softening for local tax measure and sales tax, property tax, et cetera. What this is resulting in across the state are municipalities taking some strategic approaches towards hiring freezes, towards reducing the expansion of new programming. Some are reducing program levels of service. Others are having to lay off employees because they're not able to afford the ongoing expenses associated with staffing. Nevada County is well positioned to weather all the economic uncertainties that are before us right now. We have several contingency plans in place. We have several talented people sitting behind me, most of them today, in support of this budget. And really what we are going to present today is the plan for how we're going to navigate the next year, regardless of what gets thrown at us from an economic perspective or a policy change perspective. I do want to take a minute to talk about Nevada County in particular. We also were challenged this year with higher insurance premiums in our general liability and workers' compensation. Our revenues, for the most part, grew very little. We're talking 2 to 4% on average of revenue growth. And some are actually reduced, some significantly or by more than 10%. And so in terms of how we plan for that, it really does require staff to be creative and dynamic and really be thoughtful about what services they're funding and what level of staffing that they can support with those revenues. Our approach to crafting this year's budget proposal was also challenged by significant fluctuations in funding, many of which remain unsettled. You'll see shortly we are largely state and federal funded, and those budgets have not stabilized just yet. And so part of our budget proposal is figuring out how we move forward and not stop the good work that we're doing every day, but also how we make sure we're not overextending ourselves and that we have off-ramps or checkpoints, if you will, during the year to assess the overall health of the organization. We're being very cautious and minimizing risk while still moving these key projects forward. I'm going to move on now to the budget development process slide. This slide shows up often because we definitely want to keep everyone apprised on the timeline of where we are. We do this year-round collaboration process in terms of the budget in light of being able to be strategic and thoughtful as well as plan for the future. So in January, your board had their annual workshop. We set priorities, the 8 priorities that we talked about in the very first slide, but also we talked about big ticket items that were coming through. You heard a presentation from me talking about revenues and how we thought they were going to be declining in the upcoming year. And while we say decline, what we really mean is a slow growth. So property tax is still growing, but at a much slower pace than we are accustomed to. And what that means is we don't have as much resources to go around. So that does require us to be, again, strategic and thoughtful about where we put those resources. In February and March, staff begins preparing their budget proposals. They spend almost 2 full months developing plans, looking at their current fiscal year revenue and expenditures, making predictions, looking at planned projects and assessing how well they're doing or whether they need to speed up, slow down, find more funding. All of that happens at the staff level within each department. Towards the end of March and in April, the staff from the CEO's office really takes a lot of time to go through each and every single budget unit to make sure that we're understanding what the department is proposing. Any questions that we have are asked and then answered. And really, it's a collaborative effort to come at a proposed budget. In April and May, this year it was almost all in May, Budget Subcommittee, which consists of the chair of the board and the vice chair of the board, met for over 40 hours over the course of 6 days and heard detailed presentations from each agency director, department head, elected official, and fiscal staff. And really the purpose of that budget subcommittee time and the amount of hours spent is to do that deep dive into this budget document and really vet out what's going on in terms of accomplishments from the departments, what they're proposing in terms of goals and objectives, how they propose to meet the priority project areas as set by the board, and how they are going to propose a sustainable fiscal plan for the upcoming year. The culmination of that budget subcommittee is this proposed budget document before you. At 700 pages, it is a lengthy document. However, it is a wealth of information, and I'll go into the kind of the formatting of it in just a second. We're here today in June to consider adopting the budget. However, today's action is really just to hear the presentation, to ask questions, to talk amongst yourselves, and to provide any staff direction for any changes that you want to see in this proposed budget. You are not voting to adopt the budget today. However, we are asking for a motion of intent to adopt. That signals myself and my staff that we can turn this proposed budget into a final budget. It will come back to the board June 24th in open session to be voted on for adoption. Once the budget is adopted, we take a little bit of a breath in July and then dive right back into development of objectives in September with our senior executive workshop. We look at key topic areas. By then, we hope to have some settlement in the state and possibly federal budgets and be able to project a little bit more how well we planned for the budget year, but also identify any policy areas that are going to come up and need further discussion with the board in January at the next board workshop. So we really are taking in feedback during this whole time, making sure that we continue to go back to those 8 policy or priority objective areas, making sure that we're making progress on those, reporting out to you said progress, and if there's anything that is causing us concern or delaying a project or two, we're able to communicate that effectively throughout the year with the board. In addition, this proposed budget is a plan. So we're talking about July to June, and at this point in June of 25, we are projecting what's going to happen by June of 26, but we don't know. So the purpose of the budget is really to be that plan of action. It's also flexible enough that it can be changed. And so as we bring agenda items to the board every 2 weeks, we're often asking for your approval to either let contracts to do the work that's being planned, or sometimes there's a grant opportunity that materializes mid-year. We bring that to the board for approval. We often bring that to approval as well as for a budget amendment because it was not planned. We don't include grant funding in the budget proposal that isn't actually under contract. And so that is one of the reasons why we bring back periodic budget amendments throughout the fiscal year to the board for action. Moving on to the budget framework, the county budget is crafted according to Government Code Section 29,000. It's also referred to as the County Budget Act. And it really does prescribe in California how all 58 counties have to structure their budget. And so a lot of the confusion with the proposed budget at 700 pages is we're prescribed in how we set the numbers. We're prescribed in how we display both revenue and expenses, or sources and uses. And I'll use those terms interchangeably throughout the presentation. The government code requires funding sources be equal to financing uses. And it does consider that fund balance is part of the balancing equation. We also have 2 different types of funds. We have governmental funds, which is your general fund, but also special revenue funds, debt service funds, capital project funds. And then we have what are called proprietary funds. This is your enterprise sanitation district, for example, or internal services funds for information services. We have different types of funds throughout this document that do specific tasks. And so the flow of money has to stay balanced within each of those funds. And yet, any one of the departments may have more than one fund in their operating budget. They may have a general fund allocation, but they may also have special revenue. So you'll see throughout the budget document, there can be a number of funds used within that budget unit. And we use transfers in and transfers out for that flow of money to move around. It does get confusing, I will freely admit that. And also, we try to demystify it a little bit by having a budget narrative as part of this display so that you have words to provide context to those numbers. The budget design represents the functions of government in what we call service budget units. And so within each agency, we have departments. Within each department, we have service budget units. And really, those, again, go back to the County Budget Act, are prescribed categorizations of how we spend and account for funds. Department budgets, as I mentioned, can use more than one fund, and the accounting structure is how we keep activities aligned, separate, and balanced. The format of the document itself meets the technical requirements set forth in the County Budget Act. It is a consistent format from year to year for the numbers. You can also go to any other California county's budget and see the same categories. So if you wanted to compare how Nevada County rates against a different county, you could have some similarity there. We do also offer financial summaries and in-depth drill downs where it's meaningful in terms of what the Health and Human Services Agency looks like as a whole, for example, and then how each of their 7 departments looks, and then each of their additional service budget units looks. So that whole section can be quite voluminous. We do try to provide department narratives with mission, accomplishments, objectives, and make it pretty clear about what activities we're proposing to do with the upcoming year, as well as how we did in the current year in terms of meeting the proposed objectives for the last year's budget. We have received best practice recognition from the Government Finance Officers Association. This is a national association. We've received this recognition for the last 10 years. I'm confident this is year 11 before you. But really, the purpose of the Government Finance Officers Association best practice is to make budgets as understandable as they can be and also still adhere to the government code requirements in terms of how we display sources and uses of funds. One thing I want to call attention to is oftentimes folks will try to compare our budget to our annual financial report and wonder why the numbers are different or why they can't even make heads or tails of them. Part of the reason is the budget is the plan, as I mentioned at the onset. It's the plan for receiving and expending funds during the year. It's intended to be amended as actual life unfolds, as funding comes, funding doesn't come, expenditures rise, expenditures decrease. It's intended to maintain that flexibility. Any change to the budget comes before the board in open session for approval. However, the annual consolidated financial report, or the ACFR, is a report of actual revenue received and expenditures spent during the fiscal year. It comes out after the fiscal year has closed, and it is a reconciliation against what we plan to do versus what we actually did. And so it can be quite difficult to compare the two if you're not kind of an expert or have some help deciphering terms. So I just wanted to set forth, like, the ACFR, or the Annual Consolidated Financial Report, looks back and the budget looks forward. We're also guided by financial management policies in how we start doing the budget and preparing. We consider these sound fiscal practices for a healthy, financially responsible county. A lot of these principles and practices come from the Government Finance Officers Association or the State Controller's Office. It is not just us kind of in a room thinking about wouldn't it be great if we did this, although there is a fair bit of that too. But we are adhering to kind of these prescribed best practices that are nationwide. We have a series of budget policies, which I'll get into in just a second. And then we have 3 other policies that are standalone documents. However, they inform how we spend money and how we save money. So our fund balance policy, for example, is how we save money. It prescribes the level of economic uncertainty balance we need available for the what ifs. It prescribes how we plan for use of funding that isn't going to come in the 12-month period of the operating budget. Our debt management policy speaks to the level of debt that we issue in order to maintain fiscal health, and talks about how we don't want to overextend ourselves or issue debt for which we can no longer repay in 5 years or 10 years if things go wrong and revenues don't come in as projected. If you recall, in March, or I'm sorry, late April, I came before the board and talked about bonding for capital projects as an option, which is what we're considering debt management. That's still an option that we will explore later this year because we have a significant amount of capital projects that we'd like to move forward with. However, in consideration of that proposal, we'll be looking towards our debt management policy to prescribe the level of debt that we're recommending to the board and the level of obligation that you're comfortable taking on. And finally, we have a pension management policy that prescribes how we handle pensions. Pension is the retirement for county employees. It is a significant liability of the county, and it is something that we look at and fund as one of the very first things in our budget proposal. The pension management is complex. It can be quite complicated, and we are using CalPERS, which is our pension organization, to prescribe how much we pay each year towards meeting our pension obligations. There's room to improve this policy, and I talked in January about wanting to have that as one of my personal goals over the next year. You will see additional documentation coming forward to the board to educate and to propose changes to the pension management policy, probably later this calendar year. However, in the budget proposal as it stands, we are meeting our obligations and we are in compliance with our pension management policy as it currently stands. The 2025-26 budget policies are fiscally sound, meaning we have fiscal discipline. We're not overcommitting based on our projected resources. We have balanced budgets, which means our revenue and our expenditures plus our available fund balance as that savings account is available for use. We use fund balances for one-time projects. We do not use fund balances for ongoing obligations expense. We also look at vacancy reviews. As positions become vacant, we're looking to see, is that position still needed? Is there a different need within that same department? Can the revenue still support that position at that level? Does the level of that classification make sense based on the work needed? This review happens with every vacancy that comes up, and it happens actually by myself in the CEO's office in collaboration with the departments. We use vacancy reviews as a way to mitigate any future challenges that we may have in a specific department with a specific funding stream. We also look at vacancy reviews in terms of limited term positions. Should we have a grant that funds a staff position, we want to make sure that staff position is in alignment with that grant performance period and that we're not creating an obligation that extends beyond that resource. For core services, we want to meet the essential needs of the community. That is what we fund first. Those are our mandated services and programs. We have staffing guidance as part of our core services, which speaks to the level of service provided and also speaks to the level of service that we can afford to provide. This does include sometimes a reorganization of departments or streamlining of services. New in this proposed budget is a director of housing and community services. That's a reflection of a vacancy that occurred during the current year, the need to focus more resources on housing in particular, and also a recognition that combining child support services and housing didn't make sense any longer. It did at one time. And so by being able to reorganize and streamline that service, we created a department head to head up the housing and community services activities. We also look to invest in technology. Last year's big topic of consideration was the enterprise resource planning system or the overhaul of your financial system. That was a significant investment. We will continue to be investing in that for quite some time, hopefully the next 20 years. However, that cost a significant amount of money, and that was what we had saved in our fund balance for that purpose. We also make sure that our budget is transparent in terms of having a standard budget format, ease of comparison year to year, standard between and amongst departments so that you can look at Office of Emergency Services and see the same budget setup for behavioral health or for the airport. We also want public access and opportunity to review the budget and comment on the budget. We want the budget to be reflective of community priorities and provide opportunity for input, which is what we're doing today. In addition, we have some budget principles that we abide by, which includes leveraging state and federal dollars to be able to maximize your local tax dollars in providing services to county residents, particularly those most vulnerable. You see this a lot in the Health and Human Services Agency with our safety net service provision, but also alongside all the other departments as well, who are being very creative in going after grant funding opportunities to leverage a small local investment with a larger portion of state and federal funding. We look to responsibly invest in critical infrastructure for public safety. So this includes our proposed firing, arm, and training range with the Sheriff's Office, but also upgrades to the jail and other capital projects, which include upgrades to our parking lots and roofs of this building, among other county facilities. We also look to support core services and priority projects through alignment of department resources and collaboration. I want to take just a moment to talk about core services because we throw that term around a lot within the budget and also in our presentation and throughout the year. Core services we define as that which is fundamental to the mission of departments and the county to meet mandated and essential community services. This is a pretty broad definition and it spans across most of the departments in the county. Areas funded by the county in this category include state mandates, emergencies, services that support community health and safety, such as county infrastructure, roads, jail, justice services, and then basic public mental health services, among other social services. So it doesn't capture the bulk of the document before you today. On page 134 of the proposed budget, you see this, these numbers, which is your proposed revenue of $391 million, proposed expenditures of $415 million, which leaves a gap of $23 million that is solved through planned use of fund balance. The presentation today will dive deep into each of these categories and demonstrate how we're planning to use fund balance as well as where we sit with revenues and expenses. So this first slide shows our proposed revenues by category. Again, these categories are prescribed by the State Controller's Office in terms of what they're called. And I will be the first to say that what they're called doesn't always make sense for what's actually in them. So my goal here today is to demystify this a little bit for you. We're going to start with federal, state, intergovernmental. This category is largely comprised of Health and Human Services Agency funds, but also roads and transit funds, and it is about 47.6% of the total revenue for the county. So a significant portion is through federal, state, intergovernmental. Within HHSA, $118 million, about 63% of the total. We have funding sources such as Medi-Cal, Mental Health Services Act, various grants, but also in-home supportive services, housing, homelessness, and essential health services. In the roads and transit section, 16% of the total federal, state, and intergovernmental category. This is where bridge replacement project funding comes and our roads repair and maintenance funding, as well as transit has significant grants available coming through this budget for zero emission buses, for paratransit vehicles, and for free, fair, and low income passes. In the taxes category, it's the next largest at 20% of the total of $391 million. We have other financing sources in the current service budget unit, that's what that SBU is, which is about 80% of the total. And really, this service budget unit is where all the taxes come in as revenue, and then they get distributed out to the departments that then use them for projects. So in this category, property taxes, just under $60 million. Property transfer taxes just over $1 million, and then sales tax at 4.3, and TOT is your transient occupancy tax or your short-term rental tax, coming in at about $1.3 million in the current fiscal proposed budget. For public works, there is a transportation tax revenue stream that comes in, as well as a road maintenance and rehabilitation account. These funds are used for road improvement, repair, rehabilitation, and maintenance. We also have Library Measure A funding, which is a local tax measure. It represents 8% of the total category and just over $6 million. Library Measure A funding supports operations and maintenance at all branches throughout the county. The remaining revenue categories are fairly small, so we've combined them on this one slide, but it consists of other financing, which is your internal transfers between funds. So if you recall, we use different funds throughout the departments, and the way that we get money to flow between those funds is through a transfer. It does show up and it does kind of fluctuate year to year. We also have charges for services, which represents the general liability premiums that come from the departments into our general liability account. We also have vehicle rental replacements that feeds through to our fleet department. And then we have licenses and permits, miscellaneous revenue, and fines and forfeitures, which is actually straight revenue coming into the county based on specific programs, specific ordinances, and the fee schedule, which you'll hear about later this morning. Taking a look at our general fund discretionary revenue category, this is a 20-year look at the change. The bottom green is your property and related taxes, which is the transfer tax combined. You can see how it grew significantly in the early 2020s, and now it is tapering off just a bit. The next category is sales tax, and really this slide illustrates the imbalance between property tax to the other general fund discretionary revenues. So while we pay a significant amount of attention to those other discretionary revenues, they're more sensitive to economics. They fluctuate more broadly based on what's going on in the economy and in the local community. Property taxes, because of Prop 13, have your standard 2% increase, but then also are increased based on sales data. So we're looking at sales data to forecast how much further than 2% property tax may increase in a given year. And so this trend over time speaks to both the volume of money coming into the county, but also from a discretionary perspective, how that pot is split up into the categories you see. Another way to look at this is discretionary revenue per capita. So the line at the top represents the population of Nevada County over time, and the green bars are the amount of revenue coming in that is considered discretionary. And so really we're looking at a change in per capita spending that has increased over the last several years as our population has leveled off after a brief blip in COVID of about 2,000 people. Our population overall stays pretty steady, and yet our discretionary revenue is able to increase. To wrap up the revenue category, parting thoughts include overall we're seeing a 7.6% increase from the adopted 24-25 budget. However, this is only a 2.2% increase from the estimated fiscal year end. And we have that difference because if you recall, the budget is the plan. It gets amended through the year as new revenue sources are identified, primarily grant sources. We don't often adjust the revenue mid-year for the normal property tax streams or sales tax or something like that. We're adopting because we receive grant funding for specific projects. And so in looking at the change from how we're going to end this current fiscal year and how we're going to start the next year, a 2% increase is pretty slim. What's changed? We have 3 capital bridge replacement projects going on that were all approved mid-year. So those budget amendments came before the board. We also had received significant grant awards in transit, in homelessness, and in wildfire prevention. We also see discretionary revenue increases that remained flat. A modest 2 to 4% is what we're looking at for the revenue perspective. Moving on to expenditures, I'm going to show you this kind of in a similar way, but we're going to start by looking at historical budget trends. And this graph really reflects the ratio between our local funds, our local tax dollars, leveraged against our state and federal funding dollars. So the top blue box is state and federal funding, and the top number in white is the total budget. And so what this illustrates over time is that while our local funds have increased, the proportion between state and federal funding to local funding has also increased. And this is a reflection of being really creative and competitive in the grant world, going after grant funding opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't receive, and also a function of state realignment funding coming to the county for those mandated service programs. There has been growth in the amount of realignment available, as well as growth in the amount of mandated services we're obligated to provide. So the great news is that we were able to increase our ratio to about 45% of federal, state, and funding as compared to local funds. The expenditures by category, same as revenues. These titles are prescribed by the State Controller's Office. They don't often make sense to a layperson, and so I will go through the same slides to try and describe what's going on within each of these categories. Overall, you see a total expenditure of $415 million proposed. The first section is salaries and benefits. This represents just under 40% of the total expenditure for the county. Our salaries, base salaries, are 53% of that category, representing about $87 million. This figure reflects contract increases from 24-25, as well as proposed 24.5 new full-time positions. It includes medical benefits, which is 12% of the total, and has increases in 2025 of about 17%. That's pretty standard throughout the medical field. Our insurance costs and premiums have increased, and the county bears a portion of that cost, as well as employees bear a portion of that cost. Insurance and workers' comp and unemployment premiums, I mentioned at the start, workers' comp insurance premiums did increase. We're seeing that here in this proposed budget. And then retirement, that $44.9 million is the county's normal cost for active employees. It is important to note that the normal cost is the identified amount by CalPERS of the cost of pensions, and that the normal cost is shared by employees through payroll deduction, as well as by the county in this budget unit. This is a look at our county staffing as compared to county population over, almost 30 years. From the year 2000, we're at 25 right now. So over time, you can see the green bars are the total budgeted employees, and the gray shaded background is our county population. So the precipitous drop a little bit in 2004 and 5, and then again in 2008, 9, 9, 10, and 10, 11. We were really steady on county employees for a number of years and just recently started increasing that number. And really that's been a reflection of, in the recession of 2008, we eliminated positions in favor of increasing contracted services. At the time, it was less expensive or more cost-effective, if you will, to contract out for services that we were mandated to provide rather than have a full-time, fully benefited employee on payroll. Since that time, the last 5 years, we've reevaluated those contracts and confirmed, in some cases, it's still more cost-effective to contract out for those services, but in other cases, it's more cost-effective to have a full-time employee on payroll. We've also seen expansions in areas of economic development and recreation in alignment with the priority objectives of the board. And so we have increased staff by 2 FTE to support those programs. What you'll see in the proposed budget is in support of the 24.5 positions here are spread across elected offices, appointed offices, the Community Development Agency, Information General Services Agency, and Health and Human Services Agency. And so really, starting from the bottom, Health and Human Services Agency, the Behavioral Health Department continues to expand as the state changes how they're addressing mental health and substance use disorders. That's requiring us to increase staffing or we lose revenue coming from the state. And so that's a function of needing additional bodies to bill Medi-Cal and leverage those funding sources in addition to providing enhanced level of service as prescribed by the state. In Information General Services, because of the increases to Office of Emergency Services over the last 3 years, they're behind in the administrative support to comply with grant requirements in the reporting realm, as well as have seen an increase in overall volume of payments in contracts and administrative work. In community development, we have a couple positions related to, I'm gonna have to look at my notes for that one. Transit, we had temporary bus drivers, significant a number of them. I wanna say we had 6 of them. And what we were finding was it was extremely difficult to hire temporary bus drivers. and that we had viable candidates for full-time positions, but no full-time positions to put them in. So looking at having repeat temporary employees where you're constantly training them, or you train them up and then they go elsewhere for a full-time employment, converting those positions to full-time equivalent made sense from a cost-effective perspective as well as an operational efficiency perspective. Having those full-time conversions improves the level of service that we have in our transit. And then in elected offices, this is primarily the sheriff's office, which received 5 positions, some reflecting the new Cal-AIM medical requirements for the jail population, but also building back some of the correctional staff and our sheriff deputy staff that were lost during the Great Recession. We're still coming back from those eliminations. And then we also have a position allocated to the assessor's office and the district attorney. In terms of services and supplies, this is our second largest category at 32% of the $415 million. Primarily, again, HHSA contracted services reflects $61 million or 46% of this category. These are your specialized licensed mental health service providers. Also reflects housing services and supports for our most needy residents, family support, child welfare, employment assistance. Most of their departments in Health and Human Services have a hybrid of full-time professional staff and contracted service staff who assist to provide these benefits. In the roads, transit, and fleet section, about $18 million. This is primarily road maintenance costs contracted out for repaving or sign creation that we can't do in our own sign shop. Larger projects get contracted out here. Again, most of these are primarily funded through state and federal sources. We also have paratransit, vehicle fleet maintenance, parts and service contracts in this category. And then finally, employee insurance premiums is the third largest category within services and supplies. So this takes the revenue received from departments and pays our insurance premiums through our risk services department. One of the public comment emails received referenced roadside vegetation management, identifying a concern with the low number of roadside miles being tackled in the proposed budget, and wanted to just touch upon this a little bit in that we have roadside vegetation management flowing throughout multiple departments, not just Public Works. We also have a website, a public-facing website that anyone can go onto and look at where our planned vegetation management work is going to be done over the next 4 years. It's a dynamic map, so you're able to zoom in and see actual roads that are planned to be treated. There's a wealth of information available in that realm on the website. So just wanting to highlight some of the more tangible expenses in this category. In other charges and interfund activity, this is where it gets a little bit wonky because there's a negative in the expenditure section, and that can be confusing. Again, this is reflective of reimbursements between departments, and so within the building department, they have computers, they use vehicles, and in order to pay for those computers and vehicles, they have a reimbursement out to fleet and out to information services. It shows up in this category, as well as the overhead rates prescribed by the state controller through our cost allocation plan are in this category, 4.5% of the total, or $18 million. The cost allocation plan is how we pay for internal services to our other user departments. So your auditor controller who does payroll, but also accounts payable, also accounting, your treasury department who receives revenue checks from our various taxing sources, and also your clerk of the board office, your CEO office, some of those larger service level departments that are internal facing are charged through the cost allocation plan, which is done each year and then billed back to departments. The other charges category at 19.5% includes direct client benefit payments. So this are your social services clients that receive cash aid or CalWorks programs. Also includes jail medical costs, debt service. We allocate some of our Prop 172 dollars to external partners. It flows through this category. And then we also have an indigent defense trial court contract that flows through this category. On other financing uses, this is a counterbalance to the other financing sources category in revenue. So this slide I'm showing a little bit differently to help illustrate in the proposed budget. There's other financing sources of $52 million, as well as general fund transfers of just over $9 million on the revenue side. And then the counterbalance of expenses, the other financing uses of $63 million. This is the transfer in and transfer out interplay between the accounts. There is a difference of $1.9 million in this category because that reflects our debt service payments, which go out to the finance authority as a one-way transfer. And finally, capital assets. These are planned expenditures. The proposed year has them at $31.5 million. There's a schedule on page 4-2, section 4.2, page 410, which identifies each capital asset proposed to be purchased in the budget. This reflects equipment at $11.1 million, which consists of radio tower infrastructure, electric charging stations, heavy equipment replacement, as well as the remaining funds for our enterprise financial system. There's an infrastructure category, which is our bridge replacements. That's why it's $19.7 million. Those are not cheap projects, as well as we have an airport ramp rehabilitation project planned as a capital asset. And then finally, the last category is building at $0.7 million or $700,000. That's capitalized construction costs reflecting the new roofs that we're putting on the buildings, as well as some of the smaller capital improvement projects. Each of the capital assets are required to have board approval. And so oftentimes if we have grant funding and perhaps the grant will pay for a new vehicle, like the sheriff boat patrol or cannabis, they requested approval to purchase unmanned aerial systems or UAS. Those come to the board as separate actions with a request to include them in their capital asset schedule. And so that's how they get added mid-year. To wrap up expenditures, we're seeing an overall increase of 7.3% from the adopted budget. This is an 11% increase from the estimated year end. And in terms of what's changed and why these increases, it's really primarily capital bridge replacement projects that were approved in the current fiscal year that will carry forward into the next fiscal year. The bulk of that construction expense will occur next fiscal year in 25-26. We have an increase due to grant awards, again, transit, homelessness, wildfire prevention. Sometimes we get awards in one fiscal year, but the activity is delayed, and it's just a timing factor that flows between fiscal years. It causes a bit of confusion because in some respects we recognize revenue in one year and recognize expense in the other. And that gets accounted for and adjusted through both our annual comprehensive financial report and also through budget amendments during the year. It does create fund balance, which is then programmed into the operational side of things in the upcoming fiscal year. You'll see that in just a second. Also, what's changed, we have vacancy savings in the current year of about $8 million. So that reflects current vacancies. You just heard a presentation a couple weeks ago on the county's vacancy rate at 8% overall. That results in savings throughout the year. And so we're reflecting that in this expenditure comparison. We also are seeing a reduced amount of transfers between funds in the upcoming year. All right, how we doing? You still with me? We're almost to the end here. Wanted to talk a little bit about fund balance, and really fund balance is complex and also it's simple. If you think about it as your home savings account, this is what you put money away for the big purchases that you can't afford on your basic income that comes in every month or every year, but you know that you need to do it. And so we use fund balance in that way, as well as some of our funding sources pre-fund projects that we're still obligated to do the project. We have the money in play. We keep it in this fund balance so that it can earn interest and it can be reserved for that planned project once it's available. So this is a repeat of the first slide. Again, the proposed budget summary showing that $23.8 million use of fund balance. And here is a graph which represents the use of fund balance as proposed against the total fund balance in each category. So General fund balance, $43.8 million. We're planning to use $4.5 million of it. In HHSA, they're planning to use $9.2 million of their $46.4 million fund balance. In realignment, 3.7 against 27.9, et cetera, on down the road. If we look at the general fund balance in particular, it has been growing, and really that growth is attributed to your fund balance policy and prudent action by the board to save up funds so that when we have large expenses, we have the cash available to fund them. In comparison of 2015, we had $28.3 million. If you were to adjust for inflation on this graph, the actual growth from 2015 to 2025, or 10 years worth of growth, is about 5%. So it's not significant when you adjust for inflation. I recognize the number is significant. And here is where that $43.7 million is planned. These are our general fund assignments. I'm showing on the right-hand column in bold where there's proposed changes to these assignments. General fund assignments are prescribed by board action. And so generally behind these numbers are a project or a series of projects that are on the docket as planned to be funded. The general category is the one exception to that. That is our minimum required fund balance reserved for economic uncertainties. So this is when, a wildfire hits or some other natural disaster and we have to have available cash immediately to continue to fund government operation and support that emergency cleanup or mitigation. We have fund balance set aside for that. It's about 15% of the planned expenditures. We also have accumulated leave liability as folks leave the organization with significant leave balances. We have funds reserved to pay that out. We're also saving money for information systems infrastructure. This is where the enterprise resource planning contract came from last year. We're proposing to replenish it back up to $2 million. That's a pretty prudent amount, and it dovetails with the information systems 5-year plan for refreshing of technology and maintaining that currency. In facilities, this is what I talked about in April, proposing to add $3 million here in recognition of the significant capital projects we have on the horizon that are near term and perhaps needing either a leveraging of debt service or a pre-work, pre-engineering, or architectural services. We would have these funds available to purchase those services, as well as create a new 5-year capital improvement program specific to our facilities. Our pension contributions, we have increased this assignment in the current year up to $6 million in reflection of the increase in staff that we've had over the last 4 years. Again, this is a reserve for if we are unable to meet our pension obligation through our normal resources, we have this available to use. In the justice services category, we are planning to use a portion of this fund balance for the body-worn camera purchase that came before the board in the current fiscal year, where we have a significant outlay of cash to purchase the system, and then the ongoing maintenance is included in their operating budgets. The board priorities category, we're seeing a decline because we're programming uses within the operating budgets for the Donner Summit project, North San Juan Fire Flow project. Some of your economic development and recreation implementation projects are coming out of this funding source, as well as the $1 million that you allocated back in March for the charters that speaks to our priority projects for the upcoming year. The special project continuation category is new in 25. We're looking at about $1 million remaining at the end of the upcoming fiscal year. After that, it will be used up and go away. So this is the assignment that was created from the projects identified with ARPA funding that we're going to extend beyond the performance deadline. It becomes general fund dollars available for those projects to continue, which is why it's called special project continuation. Primarily, it's being used this current year for economic development and recreation, but also for some limited term positions tied to that enterprise resource planning replacement of the finance system. We have 8 full-time equivalents on the books that are limited term. They're intended to go away. They're currently being funded with this source. And then we have a bunch of miscellaneous assignments, which includes a reserve for civil litigation, We have some funds set aside for little things like that that add up to this $3.9 million. We're not proposing an increase overall. However, there are changes in the assignments themselves, which are detailed in the budget book. So a total commitment and assignment of the general fund of that $43.7 million, we're proposing zero be unassigned to equal that total fund balance. Okay, what's ahead? All the fun stuff is ahead. State federal budget impacts. We know the state and federal budgets are going to impact us. What we don't know is how. And so tasked with preparing a 12-month budget without knowing how 44% of our funding is going to play out is challenging. We chose to take the approach of being conservative and yet not eliminating programs right out the gate. We're choosing to be a bit optimistic, a bit realistic, and also a bit hopeful that our safety net programs and services will remain intact in some way. We recognize that the program requirements and policy direction may change, but are hopeful that the overall funding amount will remain. In addition, I had mentioned before, we have some contingency plans at play that aren't reflective in your budget. It wouldn't be appropriate to put them in the budget at this time because they are contingency. They are, in case this happens, then we will do this. We will be bringing before the board any significant changes to this budget throughout the year. We anticipate the state budget might be adopted in the next couple of weeks. We are hearing that the federal budget is pushing towards adoption July 4th. We also know that come October, there's going to be another federal budget that gets adopted. And so there will be additional changes coming in the fall that may require us to pivot and change our proposed budget midstream. So our approach to this is to remain flexible, to remain apprised of what those funds are being used for. When we bring contracts to the board, they will have an extra layer of scrutiny from additional my office and county council to make sure both that we are pretty confident the funding is there or we are extremely confident the funding is there, but also for contracts in particular where we're obligating county resources, we want to make sure that there is language in that contract should the resource not materialize or be reduced in some way. We have the ability to change that contract. We aren't on the hook to fully pay out a contract with resources that we didn't end up getting. That's an extreme case, but it is absolutely possible. And so by having language in the contract that speaks to it, that puts it up front, it actually helps communicate with our vendors and with our staff to ensure that we're mitigating risk and we're being prudent with our fiscal resources. Our proposed budget includes strategic and conservative estimates, both from grant-funded perspectives, but also realignment, which is coming from the state, and on our planned use of fund balance. We are being extremely cautious in using our fund balance for one-time things and not obligating us to ongoing expenses. In terms of an economic outlook, it is uncertain, and I think we've said that for 3 years now. It's been uncertain. We're not planning on a recession, but we are prepared if we need to quickly pivot and make sense of what we're seeing in the economic resources that are coming through the state or through property tax, but also through our federal government and spending through the state. We have strengths in the economy, including strong hiring numbers. They've continued to stay strong. We have continued economic growth. We have a stock market that, although it's fluctuating wildly, is still resilient and it's still performing. And so we do have resources both in our fund balance and in our investment portfolio to weather a slowdown and or recession. We're monitoring this on a monthly basis. We're taking stock of what's going on around us and not just looking insular and thinking that everything's fine if Nevada County is fine, or everything's a disaster if Nevada County is a disaster. We're really looking at that holistically to make sure that we're both prudent and fiscally sound. We will continue to bring in and leverage state and federal dollars. We are still aggressively going after grant funding. We are still going after earmarks at the federal government. We are still looking to put plans in place so that we are shovel ready when that grant opportunity comes, where we will be much more competitive if we have a plan in place ready to go, if we have site control, if we have designs ready, All of those things are looked at in a grant application that's a competitive process to evaluate whether or not Nevada County is the right agency to award funds to. With that, I want to say thank you from the County Executive Office to the Budget Subcommittee, to the Auditor Controller's Office. We had 2 interim budget analysts this year, Mindy Trigg from Auditor Controller and Payroll, and Ellen Glass from Behavioral Health. They spent half of their day with us over the course of about 12 weeks, helping us prepare the budgets, doing some analysis work, and learning all about county finance. And also department heads, fiscal managers, and staff, we couldn't produce this budget without them. And while they are on the front end and we're on the back end, it is one big collaborative document before you today. With that, I'm happy to entertain questions from the board.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was a lot of information packed in an hour, and I know it reflects a huge amount of work by a huge number of our staff. And I just want to commend you for all the hard work. We had a great ad hoc budget committee set of meetings in May, and really pleased that you're coming forth with a fiscally prudent, balanced budget. So thank you for all that work. So Supervisor Swarthout and I had a lot of time to look at this budget. So I want to start by asking my other colleagues what questions they have. And Hardy, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Job well done. I like it, yeah. This is the first year in 3 years I haven't been on budget subcommittee. It's kind of refreshing. And thanks to the budget subcommittee for going through the 45 or plus hours to make it all possible and do the hard work for us. I don't have a tremendous amount of questions. I'll just kind of go in order based on the presentation, just kind of general questions. But the revenue growth 2 to 4%, how did that fluctuate from what was forecasted previously in the previous budget year? And is that, I think I understood you correctly, that's what you're forecasting for the revenue growth in the upcoming year?
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, last year we projected that property tax was going to grow by 5%, for example. This upcoming year, we're actually projecting 4%, so it's a slight decrease, but that is the largest source of discretionary revenue.
Yeah.
The 2 to 4% is a comparison of what we expect to end the year with versus what we're proposing to start the year with.
And the expectation, is it based on actuals, the actuals that you're receiving kind of chronologically over the course of the year?
Yeah, and actually not just over the course of the year, but we have revenue data that dates back probably 15 to 20 years, depending on the source. And so we look at that long-term trend as well as the point-in-time trend to inform our projections and our estimates. We find that the long-term trend helps kind of smooth out any point-in-time fluctuations. We also have several revenue sources that are either behind the fiscal year, meaning we don't get payment until October or sometimes December. And then we have the 2 property tax payments. So throughout the year, revenue is not a constant 1/12 of the budget. We have to take that into consideration when we're doing estimates.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's complex, and I know that from looking at it, based on the assumptions you make there, it radically affects the use of fund balances, which creates a cascading effect in the other budget units. So I just thought I'd ask there. And this is a process question more for people listening, but could you just kind of outline the mid-year process for changes or kind of remaining nimble and flexibility in the budget process and how that's handled from a public kind of insight and transparency perspective?
Sure. We have a couple different ways that we amend the budget throughout the year. We have 4 quarterly budget amendment staff report items that come before the board as standalone items. We call them consolidated budget amendments because they do cross all funds in the county. And that's based on a review at the quarter end of where the accounts are relative to revenue and expenditures. So we always want to maintain a balanced budget. We recognize that there are delays both in revenue receipt because some are reimbursement. And so we've outlaid expenditure and we're catching up on the revenue, but also making sure that that's within our planned budget proposal. So that is one opportunity. It comes before the board agendized about every quarter. also individual items come before the board, and they will be signified if it's a budget amendment in the title. It will generally require a 4/5 vote of the board to approve a budget amendment. And primarily those amendments are reflective of new money coming in. And so it's a request to increase the budget. We don't often or haven't recently come forward with a budget amendment to decrease the budget. We may do that if, if things go sideways at the state or federal level or with one of our funding sources. It may be prudent for us to bring forward a standalone item to the board and address that specific instance and the impacts in terms of levels of service and budgetary impacts within that department, should that materialize.
Okay, yeah, thanks for summarizing that. I just want to make it aware for people listening that when we adopt the budget, there's other actions at play for the board and the community to weigh in on that. The fund balance is interesting because it's kind of this balance of community building priorities versus rainy day. It's like what we all do in our own finances. But I was just wondering, I think it was page 23. Or no, I think that's local federal. I may have missed it, but there's a graph that shows that, the use of fund balance, the use, and then the total set aside. I think up one. 36 maybe.
That one?
Yeah. I was just curious how much it over the course. Perfect, that's the one. How much has it changed over the course of time, or consumption or use of fund balances, and what's the total fund balance set aside at the end of the budget period?
So in terms of set aside, our fund balance policy speaks more specifically to the general fund because that is our discretionary pot of money, meaning the board has the ability to direct where those funds go. The other funds displayed on the screen in Health and Human Services, in realignment, in community development, and share of special revenue funds, those are more prescriptive in terms of what they can be used for. And so the use of those fund balance and the amount of fund balance is going to fluctuate based on operational needs. I think HHSA is probably the easiest one to explain because HHSA and realignment together are our state mandated programs. They operate and provide services based on a combination of state, federal, and local dollars. And those state and federal dollars are reimbursement based. And so they come after the services have been provided. And we need that fund balance available for cash flow to make sure that we don't overdraw our checking account, if you will. And sometimes those reimbursements can take 6 months. And with behavioral health in particular, as they're changing the system and the method of payment, we saw at the start a significant delay in receiving reimbursement. And by virtue of having that fund balance available, we're able to weather that delay in payment. In addition, if there are policy changes to the level of service that we provide, the board has an opportunity to choose to use those funds to have a slow rollout of those changes over time. There's mechanisms that we could use to make it sure it's not an abrupt stop of benefits, but rather, a 3-month window or something like that. So that provides flexibility when you have changes in programmatic timing or levels of funding.
Yeah, like policy-driven changes that you need to respond to. I was just trying to get to it just for the board's purpose of understanding when we talk about building housing or supportive housing or workforce housing or things that are really require capital intensive programmatic review, the pot of money inside the fund balances separate from the general fund is part of what I'm just interested in always looking at, because there's, over the course of time, there's a lot in there, and I know that we spend a lot, need to save a lot, so I just want to make that point.
Yeah, you'll see sheriff special funds in particular come into play this budget cycle as they move forward with plans to build their firearms training center.
Yeah.
They're planning on using these special funds. They're not planned now, which is why it's only 1.8 million out of 9.8. But at the time in which they're ready to issue a contract for service, you'll have a request come before the board to release that fund balance for use in that particular project.
Yep, understood, thank you. The vacancy rate, I forget which slide it was. I should have written the slide numbers down. But the vacancy rate, I think it was 8% or something. There's a savings in there. Is that pretty typical year to year? Does that run, is that fairly average, that number?
8% is pretty average. We fluctuate, I think, as low as 4 or 5% in good years, and then probably as high as 12%. But generally, your folks like to work here in the county, and we do have an aggressive hiring practice that we've improved over the last several years of reducing the amount of time it takes to hire somebody from point of application to point of onboarding. We've been able to reduce that. Oftentimes you hear government takes forever to hire, and it is true. But we've been able to make that more efficient through the help of our HR department.
Yeah, thanks. This is just a really broad question as we look at the big, beautiful bill and all these different federal allocation, kind of huge master plans over us. If there's Medi-Cal or cuts to some of those federally funded programs, is the local taxpayer kind of straddled with that to make these ends meet until the budgets either get approved or amended or a different legislative bill is taken up, right? So when you talked about policy changes and we have the savings account that help us weather these ups and downs, if it goes down and the federal funds are not dispersed to the county, do we have to take our own money to pay those bills while policy changes are implemented?
It's going to depend. What a great answer, right? It's going to depend on what the change is. In some respects, if they change eligibility requirements and folks are no longer eligible to receive that funding source, those benefits, we would not necessarily step in and fill that gap. If they're going to reduce the level of funding, we've heard with Medi-Cal that the federal government is proposing to increase the state's share of Medi-Cal funding, and the state currently splits that share with counties. And so we are hearing from the state that there may be a recommendation to increase the amount of local share of dollars to keep that project whole. That could impact our local dollars, and it would impact our HHSA and realignment funds in particular. We would have to make some policy recommendations to the board as to what that looks like. Because certainly we have resources, but we don't have resources forever. And so what level of commitment are we able to put forward to provide that safety net service at a level that our residents need, and at the same time continue to maintain that flexibility and fund balance for cash flow and all the other projects that we have? So there will be, some robust discussions.
There's, Robin was outlining paratransit cuts that could remove our transportation funding from the Fed that allows us to operate paratransit. And so that's an example for me that as a board member, I'd want to understand the local implications of that, try and make sure that we would have some money set aside to continue those services in light of a federal cut. Just as one board member, just throwing that out there, things like that, that troubles me. A quick question on the ratio of salaries to total budget, the delta between those. Has that changed over time, or has that remained fixed? I know your graph, which I really appreciate your graph that shows the total staffing. Yeah, back, that one, yeah. I really like this graph, but I was just wondering, is the salaries to total budget ratio or that delta remain fairly static over time?
That's a great question. I don't know that we've delved into that level of detail. We tend to look at the whole category, which includes new positions as well as salary increases. So while within the fiscal year we have a salary increase dollar amount that we're aiming for and planning for, there are always going to be increases to benefits and retirement and whatnot. So we have to look at the category as a whole and what that fluctuation is. But I'm certainly happy to dive into that.
Into it later. Okay, and then one quick question. The 172 funds, can you just give us like a really brief overview of where those are headed for the next fiscal year? Which types of organizations, fire, law enforcement, community benefit, et cetera?
Yeah, so there's a resolution in the proposed budget which outlines the agencies that will receive Prop 172 funding. That was set by ordinance by the board several years ago. And it is primarily, it goes to the sheriff's department, and then a percentage gets allocated out to other agencies, both law enforcement and fire. And so I would look at that reso for the specific detail. I will say overall, as a funding source, Prop 172 got a tremendous economic hit in the current year, and we're projecting in the upcoming year as well. So about a 10% drop in revenue year over year in that specific funding source is what we're seeing. Again, that's a specific type of sales tax. And so our sales tax consultant provides us a Prop 172 specific report with forecasting. And this year, I believe, is the last year we're projecting a drop, and then it levels out at the current year level. So our organizations, unfortunately, are looking at a semi-permanent reduction in the level of revenue coming from that source.
Yeah, there's some pretty small, I mean, I know at least in my district, there's some small special districts and fire agencies that receive a little tiny, it's very small, but it's very meaningful to them because they are very small, which is part of kind of rural counties. I think that's interesting to think a lot about.
Yeah.
$10,000 in 415 million is not a lot. $10,000 to somebody who has a $10,000 budget, it's all they have.
Right.
So that's something for us to think about. One final question, then I'll be quiet, but the total ARPA, the unspent ARPA dollars, I didn't totally make sense of it, but what's the final closure on the ARPA money at the end of this budget year? Because I know we kind of did an extension to shift those or reallocate them. Just wondering if it's going to be, do we think we're going to spend it all is my question.
We are spending it all. We have until December 31st of 26, I believe, to expend the ARPA dollars specifically. We do have some ARPA funding in the budget, and then we have the special project continuation, which is actually now general fund. So we were able to take a board item almost a year ago to use the remainder of that ARPA dollars for the revenue loss category, which is an eligible expense. And what that did was inflate the general fund by that same amount, earmark those projects under a special assignment for continuation, because we knew that they weren't going to finish in the same amount of time. And so some of those projects include grant matching. We had $3 million in grant matching, where the grant cycle, it can be 18 months. And so that timing didn't quite work out with the prescribed timing. Also, our economic development and recreation department staff were seated with ARPA funding for a planned 3 years. And so that's what you're seeing in the currently proposed budget that will end after this next year. So those positions will continue forward in a general fund capacity as well as through grants. So things like that were embedded, but we have spent all of our funding. We will be spending it by December 31st.
Yeah, I'm glad they gave enough flexibility to put it back into general fund and then hold it until you can get some of the long-term projects done.
Yeah.
We just met with somebody from, oh, sorry about that. Yeah, we were just meeting with some folks from Utah, and it was interesting. We had a big conversation about the use of ARPA funds, and I'm really proud of our staff and our board, and particularly for turning those funds around for community benefits so quickly and expending them and really putting them back into our economy and the small business through the grant process. So I just wanted to commend everybody. That was a job well done, and it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was actually really super meaningful for everybody. That's it. Thanks for the time.
Good questions. Rob, questions? Yeah.
Thank you for that. You guys did a great job laying everything out. And on a side note, my daughter was heading to her math final this morning at high school, and kids always say, "When are you going to use math, in your life?" And I'm going to tell you, 691 pages. I have some comments, but my questions and/or concerns are more kind of general and not specifically related to the individual business units. And I feel like I have a lot of trust in the department heads and the departments, everybody working on this. As far as like a snapshot right now for this year, a lot of my questions, and I think a lot of people have them, are on sort of the long-term impacts, the sustainability of certain things. And for me, I'm particularly kind of zeroed in on the pension, the unfunded pension liability, and some things you talked about. So most of my questions are related to that. Can you, just a clarifying one, it's page 17, the total cost of county pensions. Can you bring that up? On the one I'm looking at is even in the executive summary, so like 1.7, there's a little narrative that I just was a little confusing.
All right. I don't have that slide to put on the screen.
My question, and you can get back to me on it, although I feel like it's relevant. In last year's narrative, it said, well, let's go to this year. It says, relating to the county pensions, the county continues to monitor the increase in pension costs. And I think last year, before my tenure, the wording was, the county continues to be concerned with ongoing pension costs. So, and I know it's semantics, but has it gotten worse this year, stayed the same, in your opinion? And then my specific question, in the narrative it says these costs increased by $2.1 million in 24-25, which would lead me to believe they've gotten worse. And then it says they're predicted to drop over the next 3 years before increasing in 28-29. The graph, and I guess we don't have it here, the way I'm reading it, it drops for 2 years and then goes up the third year. So that's not entirely accurate that it drops the next 3 years. But anyways, the broader question for me, I know the grand jury brought this up in 2017-18 and the second time last year. And looking at the response to the grand jury, I know the county disagreed with a number of things. One of the recommendations was this plan, and I feel better because I think you mentioned it, that would be coming. In the response to the grand jury, it said within 6 months, there'd be this comprehensive pension liability master plan going forward, and then I think it would be brought to the board, they said in January. Am I understanding you correctly that it's something we're hoping to get to later this year? We haven't got to that yet?
Correct. We had some staffing challenges that prevented that plan from going forward as planned last
Gotcha. Okay,
July.
so that's, I feel better knowing you talked about it. I mean, I will say, like moving forward when we go to the vote, I'm torn because that's something I would love to see now. And in a broader, I guess, scope, you know, we talked about how much we rely on the state. This CalPERS is $180 billion underfunded. And obviously that translates, and I think ultimately the taxpayers are the ones that pay for it. So am I correct in reading that we're 68% funded?
We are 62.9% funded. We were 62.3 last year.
So it's kind of...
We have gotten better, very slightly.
Right.
We haven't backpedaled, though.
And is there like a best standards or a, I mean, I know, and let me actually take a side note. I want to commend the job that my colleagues and previous Board of Supervisors have done. I think you were right on when you said we're in a healthy spot relative to a lot of other counties. And once again, that's relative. But I think the fiscal responsibility in the past is definitely helping. My concern is going forward. So that 65%, we're anticipating if there aren't any recessions or anything, it's gonna, well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. I think your plan will address that. I will throw out though, when we talk about other counties, I know Sonoma County since 2020 has paid down their unfunded pension liability by 37%, and they're now like 92% funded. Not to say it's apples to apples, but I know there are a lot of government entities, municipalities that are looking to do that, and it's something I would recommend. And it's probably my biggest maybe question, if not concern about this budget, is that there's not anything in it. I would love to see us have a plan, which you're going to come up with, to start addressing that, because I think both on the federal level, state level, it's this huge potential liability down the road, and I don't think it's been addressed enough. And I'm not alone in that because the grand jury's brought it up twice, and we kind of, and I would compare it to, I love the comparison you made to a household budget, where if, we plan for these big expenses and we have to save and this or that, well, I would compare the pension liability to like an estate tax, where you can do all this planning and then you get to the end of your life and your heirs have to pay 50%. And this was unexpected, unfunded liability. They may have to sell things, they may have to change their lifestyle. So it's that hidden sort of long-term that I have concerns on. So I won't beat a dead horse there. It relates to the, I guess, when I talk about specifics of the budget, the staffing increases and the grants. And the grants, in my mind, are a double-edged sword, because I love how we're almost too good at our job, the county, our staff, in these grants that they're receiving, but because those aren't necessarily, well, we don't even know in the immediate term, but long-term, a lot of those end, yet we're adding staff. And if I'm not mistaken, after 5 years, those staff become vested in the pension system.
Well, it depends on how the staff are brought on. So
Okay.
in grant-specific funding for staff, those are considered limited-term positions.
Okay.
So the position expires, coinciding with the grant expiration.
So the impact on the long-term pension cost is
very minimal.
Is minimal.
Right.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
For example, the ERP limited term 8 positions, those are brought on for a 3-year term. They're not going to hit their 5 years to be fully vested by the time the position terms out.
Sure.
Now, the people in those positions may go on to county employment in
Right.
other areas, but the positions themselves are set to expire, and that's how we treat grant-funded positions. In the last 5 years, we've made that change, where 100% of our grant-funded positions are limited term to
Okay.
coincide with
But
that.
if that grant were to roll over, or that person were to continue in a similar capacity at 5 years, yeah, okay. Which, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's sort of a double-edged sword with the grants, in my opinion. All right, I think that's about what I had. I had so many notes here.
And Supervisor, if I can just address a couple of your pension questions.
Yeah.
In 2011, we were 55% funded.
Yeah.
And so we have fluctuated, and honestly, that number, that percentage of funding fluctuates every single year, because every single year CalPERS puts out a new report of an actuarial study of our obligations relative to our interest earnings, relative to our payments in the system. I think we are just now starting to see the benefits of the conversion at CalPERS to PEPRA, which increases the employees' share of their pension benefit. And we're seeing those classic members, which had a much lower percentage, if any percentage, that they were contributing, actually retire and go into the system. And so the number of retirees on our pension system is higher than our current employees. So we are seeing that shift a little bit in terms of the cost. We do fully fund our obligation on an annual basis, and I think this county and boards before us both have set aside funding to both weather those fluctuations, but also in an event where there's an opportunity to buy down that liability or improve that ratio of funding that's available. That's certainly something that's going to be part of the comprehensive plan, and I'm also upset that I wasn't able to get that done, because that was chief of mind for me as well, coming in as your CFO, is really to kind of level set that pension long-term sustainability plan, reflecting we have these classic members that have pensions that the county is funding more than the employee is, but then we also have this PEPRA contingent, which is a 50-50 split. And so that prescribed annual amount from CalPERS that we pay up front is intended to capture the total cost relative to our money on our dollars on payroll. And so it is intended to make sure that you're keeping up with it and you're not increasing your liability. What fluctuates and what none of us can really predict is that market interest. CalPERS has a prescripted, we're going to earn X percentage in the market, and some years they do and some years they don't, and that next actuarial report kind of takes that into consideration.
Yeah, and I wasn't blaming you at all. You do a great job
No, I know
on
that.
that. It just, if I had it in front of me, I think I'd feel more comfortable as opposed to the unknown, being one of my concerns. And then I know Jerry Brown in 2013 passed some of those reforms that you talked about, and but I hear the legislature's talking about maybe rolling back some of those. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but I'll look forward to your plan. I think that's really all I have on specific questions.
There'll be a chance to come back for more questions, or you can pull one whole section if you decide you want to do that. And I just want to add on to this conversation. Just so I was a state employee for a long time, CalPERS also funds all the state employees. So it's a monster, and the state has a lot of obligation to make sure this works. It's a constant fight between agencies and the governor's office and CalPERS. So it's something we're all in the middle of. And we did, I think you mentioned that, a couple years back, we did establish a new fund to set aside, I think it was 3 million a year, 30 million.
4.5 million in our pension trust fund. Yeah.
How did I come up with 3? It was close.
We might have started with 3 and
we
increased
started with
it.
3. That's probably what I'm remembering. And so that we are adding on to the pay down from what we normally did. So I'm assuming we're going to be looking at a plan that may do that again. But again, anything we pull out and put into that plan comes from somewhere else. So, yeah.
So Chair Hall, I think it's also important to note, as Supervisor Tucker has used Sonoma as an example, it looks like that Sonoma had a pension obligation bonds that were issued in 1993 and 2003 for amount of $581 million. So they took out debt to pay their pension obligations. And our board intentionally has decided not to bond for pensions and to build that balance and to smooth those costs over time. But if that is something that the board would like us to reevaluate, it would be great to have that discussion to provide staff direction.
I'm definitely not advocating a bond for that. And I don't know if
That's exactly what Sonoma
and
did.
I don't know if that was related. I think the bigger point is we're 65% funded. CalPERS, which is severely underfunded by any reasonable standard, 190 billion, is like 72% funded. So we're even below that. Now, relative to other counties, we're doing a good job. Some counties, I should say. But the idea that 65% funding of that long-term unfunded pension liability, particularly coming off 10 years of the greatest stock market in history, where CalPERS, their return was significantly lower than even an interest fund. I don't trust CalPERS. I don't think their house is in order. So yeah, to your point, I'm not advocating for a bond, but I think your plan will probably include this because the fact that it's in the grand jury 2 reports, the fact that you highlighted it as something you feel bad you didn't get done because you want to, it's important. And I think that's, for me, that's just, like I said, the individual snapshot 2025-26 budget, I feel confident. And the hard part is, though, there's not a unit that I would pull and say, I mean, of course, Health and Human Services is huge, but that I would pull and say, no, we shouldn't be doing that, we shouldn't be doing that, because it's kind of, this pension thing is across all departments, and so there's not even one that I would pull.
So are you, I think your point is well taken. I think it's been heard, and we are going to have a presentation coming back. Can you anticipate when that might be, Erin, on the pension issue specifically?
I would anticipate in the fall.
In the fall, okay. So, yeah, and feel free to have continued conversations outside of here among you, Supervisor Tucker, and with Erin, so she can take into account all of your concerns, and we'll hopefully we'll address those in the fall as well. Hardy, you wanted to add something?
My question was on the OPEB Special Trust Fund, which is the 4.5, which you hit. So that was my only piece that the board has periodically attempted to address it based on extra money we have in the budget to pay it down. So it's not, I guess my point is, absent a comprehensive plan that you're going to bring forward, which is a great point, we have chipped away at it intentionally.
Okay. Supervisor Hook.
I know you guys asked great questions, so you took a whole bunch off my list. So I'm just going to go back to some little simple things, like just, for example, our vacancy rate. So, which we have is fairly low, but that's also a policy to not have a high vacancy rate, right? So we take care of that inside that. So I thought that was just an interesting, just small thing, because you already did all the big stuff I wanted to ask. And then I have I had some folks ask a question about this too, is, and we do this, I believe, is when we have these projects, we bring those to the community to see what's going on, right? Those are updated, whether it was ARPA funding, whether it's a big project that we're working on, we come back and communicate the dollars being spent out so that there is oversight, correct?
We do that in a couple different ways. We have a county newsletter that does highlight big projects that come before the board for action, both ahead of the action proposed to the board as well as kind of milestone progress updates. As you supervisors are out in the community, we provide you with both talking points and visuals and sometimes staff support if there's a particular project of interest in the community, we are always happy to go out and speak with the residents and answer their questions and make a presentation or just kind of receive feedback. So that there is opportunities that around the year for all kinds of different projects.
Yeah, I don't have any other real questions. I got to tell you, though, I actually have really liked the social media postings that kind of give an overview. It kind of breaks it down a lot simplistically for everybody to understand a little better, myself included, because sometimes it is so overwhelming when you start looking at 700 pages of a document. So I appreciate that. And I want to say I appreciated your presentation today, too, as it goes into a little just more highlighted and I guess at a level for community to actually understand and have better questions. So I'm looking forward to public comment. And I've been watching social media. There hasn't been a lot of comments. Had a couple of letters that have come in that we've answered and talked. And again, we've talked about unfunded liability and those things before. So I think we covered about all of the big things on my list.
And if I could real quick, because that just triggered that I forgot to mention, our enhanced public outreach this year included highlighted in our county newsletter, KNCO, we talked about the budget being available for public review. We issued a press release. We got some good coverage in all of the local papers. In addition, we created a social media post to highlight each agency and who they are and what they do with the funding, always asking for public input. We reached 5,000 engagements on social media between Facebook and Instagram. We had 28 clicks on our county newsletter article. There were 24 views of the budget document off of our budget portal, and we received 4 email comments. So a great turnout for the first time that we tried to humanize the budget a little bit and also make sure that folks knew this was their opportunity to come before the board and interact with you as well as provide comments. Thanks.
Just one more little comment too. So one of the questions, and I think what Hardy brought up too, or somebody about sunsetting our projects that come in on grant funds. And we do that particularly. I mean, things end, but I'm just gonna say we do build programs sometimes and we still look for grant funding to move them along.
We do.
Yeah, because we have some important ones that I could think from behavioral health specifically that have become real parts of our community and do good things. So I'm just saying we have to have room for movement on projects that really develop and take care of our community. And then back to that, we're always going to look at core services first. I mean, if something has to get cut, we're obviously going to go into some of those other programs, but not the core services that really make a difference here to our community.
Correct.
Okay, Lisa and I don't have questions, so I think we're going to open it up to make sure we have any other public commenters. We'll start here in the board chambers.
Good morning, Michael Taylor, District 1. Can I ask questions is it a workshop format?
Yeah, if you ask a few questions, keep them so
yeah,
I can.
It's quick. Slide 28.
Because we'll, at the end, then I'll go back to Aaron.
Got it. Slide 28, well, it's not that important. The elephant in the room is pension coverage. We are a $250 million shy meeting our requirements in the pension. That's a huge amount of money. It shadows the 50 million or 40 million that we have in reserves. I think that it's important that you follow through on your statement and that the public statement that when you presented the budget to the community, that it was a balanced budget. I think the sad part is it's not balanced. It's balanced by state law guidelines that says it's balanced, from shoveling money from here or there. A balanced budget would be a budget of $392 million. My recommendation for getting to this balanced budget would be taking the 9% increase in wages and benefits down to 3% to try to offset some of that loss. The other thing that I would recommend is the board takes a pay cut themselves if they're asking others to take pay cuts, and put your guys selves on a cap payment of $60,000, which is 30% more than you were getting 4 years ago. I want to point out that the coverage for pensions 4 years ago, actually it was about 5 or 6 years ago, was 76% coverage. There has been an acceleration in how much people get paid. There's been an acceleration in hiring people. And then you can see going the opposite direction is coverage. In my article in the Union today, I used round numbers, 75, 65, but the reality is it's 62 point something coverage. It's worse than what even I put in the paper today, telling the community how messed up we are with our pension coverage. We're going to be at 55% pension coverage in 5 years, staying on the same trajectory. Hiring, fees go up, and we're going to be at 55. So I highly recommend you send this budget back to the staff and have them come up with a budget that's $392 million, a balanced budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Aaron, you just addressed a whole bunch of the pension questions. I think you had different statistics in terms of what our coverage used to be and where we are today. If you want to address anything more there, and then I'll just also mention, just obviously in terms of rising costs and rising salaries, and there's cost of living increases across the board. We don't even talk about that in here. That's an assumption in this budget. Every county, every state includes those as well. Aaron, did you want to address any of those comments on the pension?
Just to say that our coverage ratio does fluctuate up and down year to year. And so while I don't have specific history on our coverage levels, it wouldn't surprise me that at one time we were at 76%, at one time we were at 55%, now we're at 62.9%. So it is a ratio, and in every single year, investment returns change, the amount we contribute changes, and the amount that we're obligating ourselves to changes. And so it is a factor of all of those assumptions and forecasts.
Thank you. And then just in terms of your comment about sending the budget back and doing it something completely different, we're in alignment with all the other counties. We're in alignment with what the state requires. This is how we do budgets, and I don't see any opportunity or chance that why we would create something completely new. Not in fact that we couldn't. So just want to address that. Happy to continue to talk about the trade-offs within this budget. Clearly, you'll be interested in coming back in the fall when we talk about some changes we might make to our pension issue. Thanks, Aaron. Any more public comment in the chambers? How about on any phone callers, Loriana?
Chair, we did receive written public comment, but there are no callers.
Okay, so we did receive written public comment. That's all posted, so the public can see it. I'll just ask one more time in the chambers, any public comment on any part of the budget? You're welcome to come share your opinion or ask your questions. Okay, well, good job on the outreach, Aaron. Thank for making sure people were aware that this was their opportunity. There'll be one more opportunity when the budget comes back to the board, but this is really the big one to get your comments in. So at this time, we are bringing it back to the board. We'll close public comment, bringing it back to the board. Any additional questions or comments? None?
I just want to add one thing, and I want to end it on a positive note because I think you did a great job with this being my first budget process. The transparency compared to past years, I think there was a big improvement with the things you discussed. Along that line, I just want to revisit, it may be, and maybe it's too late, with the grand jury response, knowing that we as a county in this official document said this will be implemented next year, and then it talked about doing what we were going to do in January. I don't know, maybe in the interest of transparency, there could be some update. This was the first I kind of heard. I didn't know why it didn't happen or whatever, but it's a small thing. Otherwise, I appreciate all the work you did, your staff, and I feel like I'm informed I still, as we prepare to vote, feel a little torn on the issues I brought up. And I think had I had that plan in front of me, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. And perhaps between now and the 24th, conversations, learning more about that, what kind of the plan is going to look like, will probably make me feel comfortable too. But I'm still a little torn on the long-term issues, not necessarily the decisions that have been made on an individual line item in this budget. So, thanks.
And Supervisor, I'm happy to make adjustments to the executive summary language to reflect the revised plan.
Great, thank you. And thank you Supervisor Tucker for raising issues. Congratulations on getting through your first year. It is the hardest one by far. And yeah, when we get to vote, our job is to vote for a budget or to recommend changes to the budget. So I'm going to ask if anybody wants to pull any items of the budget to go into any deeper.
No other items. I just want to point out again too, though, sometimes we get a lot of questions about this, but we talk about and this team that's all out here working, that we have what's called a high-performing organization here. And what this group contributes and makes, with the funding that comes in, we're talking about a $23 million grant we just got. So that's in part of this budget that makes it look different too, right? So I just want to say, going through this, I would advise people to come in and really look at some of the statements inside what happens in each one of these departments and really what's coming back into this community. And I get it about unfunded liability. I hear you 100%, but that's how they perform as well. It's not necessarily how we perform. It's how they perform. And so us keeping up with that and staying in that and having a reserve if we had to come in with those fluctuations is good thinking on my part. I'm not a person for looking at the bonds because they could make a mistake. That's why we're in the position we're in, is because of bad management at one time there, right? And so I just want to say there's some real fluctuation in that as we look at this. And then I want to just look out at this team that put these budgets together that try to work as frugally as they can. We all asked everybody to take a look at that, and what was the 3% everybody took off, because we're really looking at being frugal for this year and as we get through the challenges that are coming. So I would say if anybody, I was surprised there weren't more questions. I think we did get some questions on social media, and I would say that in this next 2 weeks before we come back with our budget, if people have questions, please reach out. I know you'll reach out to Aaron. We can have those other conversations that can fine tune this. So I just want to throw that out. There's a lot of work. I wish people would follow each one of these guys around all day and see what happens and what goes back into our community. Because I think those are important, especially when we get to social services, some of those things that are highlighted and that are necessity here. So just my 2 cents today.
Chair
Thank you for
Hall,
that.
If I could just make one comment. I think the pension liability, I appreciate being raised. It's discussed all year round with our fiscal staff and our budget subcommittee. I want to make sure that the public understands, the board understands, we currently do have a pension policy, so we're not in a void of not having guidelines. I credit previous boards, your Hank Westons, your Nate Beesons, who really prioritized that, and we have been making really good progress in terms of our liability and not bonding. So when you do look at these really low rates, it's because those counties and those cities have created more debt to pay off their liabilities. And our board had lots of discussion of was their intent not to do so. But we have prepayment programs that were on the heels of that policy that was adopted by the board. We also created the reserves to help smooth off the cost. And then also we work with experts in the industry to look at what our best practice is. So we will definitely bring back an enhanced policy to reflect the policy direction. But I didn't want to make sure it was clear that we currently do have a policy in place that guides in terms of our pension liability currently.
And I just wanted to add, I know there's public interest in it too, but I think the primary source of my interest or desire to bring it up is the grand jury report. That's something I think we should take seriously. And just knowing that 2 of the recommendations, there were 2 of them, one of them, we didn't do what we say we were going to do. So I just want to bring that up. I'm not faulting anyone, and I know, like I said, I think we're doing a great job relative to some counties. I'd just like to see it, keep it in mind, which it sounds like we are.
Okay, I think at this point, I am looking for a motion of intent and a second to adopt the budgets remaining, to adopt the budgets, all of the budgets on this item.
I would make a motion with the intent to adopt the budget with the modifications Supervisor Tucker's mentioned in the narrative portion, and adopt the budget as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second with some of the changes in the executive summary as discussed.
District 5,
Yes.
District 2,
Just to clarify, he said adopt the budget. We're adopting the intent.
The intent,
Okay.
correct.
Oh, yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 1.
Yes. Thank you very much. Well done. We have 2 more budgets to do, but we're going to take a 10-minute break here first, so thank you. break, and I apologize, we don't have 2 more budgets to do. We have 1 budget and a fee schedule, so to correct that information. And so, gentlemen, thank you. Okay, we're back, and we're going into our item number 2, a public hearing to consider oral and written comments concerning proposed fiscal year 2025-2026 budgets for zones 1 through 12 of our sanitation districts, totaling $14,303,976. And so I will turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Chair Hall. And Aaron Mettler, again, your Deputy County Executive Officer, Chief Fiscal Officer, coming before the Sanitation District Number 1 for a public hearing this morning, really to talk about the Sanitation District budget. This is one of the unique budgets where the Board of Supervisors sits as the Sanitation District Board as well. I will turn it over to Tricia Tillotson, our Community Development Agency Director.
Thank you, Erin, and good morning, Board. I'm joined, of course, with Brad Torres, our Sanitation General Manager.
So if we could just take a pause, and Chair Hall, if you could reconvene as the Sanitation District. I apologize if you did so, but we want to make sure we capture that correctly.
That's right. Okay, so we are, so I don't have this. We're exiting out. What's the word? Thank you. We're adjourning from our normal special Board of Supervisors meeting and reconvening as the Board of Directors of Nevada County Sanitation District 1. My apologies. Go right ahead, Tricia.
Thank you. So as I was mentioning, Erin, myself, and Brad Torres, our Sanitation General Manager, are here to present on this proposed budget. As a reminder, our Sanitation District Number 1 serves Lake Wildwood and Penn Valley, Lake of the Pines and Higgins Corner, Gold Creek, Mountain Lake Estates, Eden Ranch, and Cascade Shores. This past year, sewer rates set in 2021 per Proposition 218 process really provided funds that were necessary for operation and maintenance this past year, including the accomplishments shown here on the screen. Our staff did necessary upgrades to 10 lift stations. Staff also implemented a cleaning and maintenance process for membrane bioreactors at the Lake of the Pines wastewater treatment plant. This was a new technique that we're expecting to save this district $96,000 a year on. Using in-house labor and equipment, our staff also replaced 2 standby generators, which will help improve performance and dependability of our plants during storm events and power outages. And then we've also seen significant reductions in inflow and infiltration, and that's really, again, due to the diligent work of our staff. Challenges, though, continue. And so the rates that were set in 2021 are already due for an update this next fiscal year. So we're going to begin that work this year. Cascade Shores is our main concern budget-wise, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail here. Meanwhile, inflow and infiltration, while we've made a lot of progress to reduce that, it's still an issue with our aging infrastructure. And then our buildings and grounds continue to require upkeep that we're diligently working on. This slide shows sewer rates from fiscal year 21-22. That's when the rate increases went into place to this next fiscal year. And adjustments to the rates set in 2021 are reflected here, as well as Higgins Village and Eden Ranch, where rates remained unchanged. This next slide shows really our zone cash balances. And so those adjusted rates have helped stabilize our zone funding. But if you take a look at the second one to the left, that's Cascade Shores, you can see we've had continued decline of the fund balance. This was predicted when we did the rate increase in 2021. But if you go back to this slide, you can see, again, second to the left, Cascade Shores is one of the highest charges for a sewer district in the state, believe it or not. So we see that to continue to decline, and we'll need to focus on that with our upcoming rate analysis. Overall, our proposed budget is shown here with planned expenditures of fund balance. And in addition to addressing the challenges we went over previously, staff will also be focusing on public awareness, and that's really of our wastewater infrastructure and so forth. We'll be focusing on infrastructure projects and then also funding sources, and that's with the rate analysis and grants. And then I&I, which is the inflow and infiltration, that's always one of our focuses to really reduce that. So I know I went over that very quickly, but we're all here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Trish. Yeah, so just a note to my colleagues at Cascade Shores in my district, it's been a really complicated problem we've had over the years. We've worked diligently on it for years, but there's really no other, we've looked at all the potential solutions to reduce those rates, but it is what it is at this point. So we're well aware of that issue. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
I have a question just in regard to the special districts, the sewer. None of them are in my district, so I'm not real familiar with them, so apologize for my ignorance. The rates, is it attached to people's property taxes and you pay it on a yearly basis, or do we bill monthly for it?
It's attached to the property.
It's attached.
Right.
So what, can you speak to like what the average cost is for the special for these sewer districts, like per year, I guess, so I could break it down per month?
Sure, and I brought that with me, and Brad can jump in here as well. It really does vary significantly based on the district. So we go from Lake Wildwood, for example, is around $1,500 a year. If you divide that by 12, though, that's very comparable to a sewer district or a sewer system like in Grass Valley, for example. Penn Valley is very similar. Lake of the Pines is about $1,800 per year. North San Juan, about $1,200. And then we go as low as Gold Creek is $585 a year. And then as high as with Cascade Shores, we're at about $2,700.
Thank you. That puts it into perspective because I know if you're in the city limits, I pay $55 a month. So it's a bargain. As I always tell people, move into the city. It's a bargain for your water and sewer in comparison. But it's good to know because we get those, I talk to people all the time who are either moving here or contemplating a move from one neighborhood to the other. So it's really good to know what their additional expenses potentially are going to be if they don't have city utilities. So thanks.
You probably said it, but it sounds like we're due for the rate survey update. Can you repeat, if you said it already, when that will be released or when it's being done?
Sure. So our current rate analysis provided fees through fiscal year 25-26. So this year, we're going to start that analysis. And what it is they take a good look at all the fund balances, what planned infrastructure improvements we have to do for the plants, and then that helps us calculate what the rates need to be. That is a full public hearing and would be coming back to the board for consideration and then also public comment, of course.
And then that'll set rates from 26 through 31 or whatever.
Correct, yeah. These typically go for 5-year periods.
Can you just go back to the slide with all the fund balances, just for curiosity? So I see North San Juan doesn't have any fund balance left.
North San Juan is minimal, but also the district is very small.
Right.
So that's why the difference in some districts, like Lake of the Pines, has a really large fund balance. That's just kind of demonstrates the size of it. And that's something like with North San Juan, a rate analysis will continue to do, even though we do this annually as well as we take a look at where are we with cash balance and how can we best utilize those funds. Do we need to slow down on infrastructure improvements or not? Meanwhile, though, you have things aging and improvements are needed.
Yeah, I think that's probably the challenge with all of these is the upgrades that have to be done and state requirements and all the things that come with that. So that is the challenge with all of these. I mean, I know North San Juan, they need to upgrade at some point. They can't even, they can't even grow. Penn Valley was in that situation until we made the changes that we did and all the upgrades that you're doing, pump stations in Lake Wildwood right now. Then we had the whole issue with the stink. down there that you guys managed. That took some work, but there's always different things that pop into this, and Cascade's always going to be a challenge, I think, for a while. But yeah, this is that I just was curious. I mean, because your job is very interesting all through the county, because we have clean water facilities, we have, well, look how many wastewater. I mean, there's just so many to deal with. So and really for not as many people that work in that they do a lot. I mean, I was impressed that you got a lot of the work done, like with the generators and some of the stuff that got rebuilt with staffing. That was huge savings.
Yeah, all of the projects that were listed there were all done with
Yeah.
sanitation district staff. So we didn't contract out for any of those, which saved us a considerable amount of money.
Speak in the microphones, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, just all of the projects that were listed were done with district staff. So we didn't have to contract out for any of those with the exception of the startup of the pumps. And so we saved a significant amount of money. And in the future, you know, it might be helpful for us to break out our larger zones and our smaller zones to give a more accurate representation in a graph like this one. Because Gold Creek, for example, their entire annual budget is like $14,000, right? So to have them sitting next to a zone whose annual budget is, you know, over $3 million, it makes it look really bad, but in reality, it's not as bad as the
No, and I think that's a good point, is they are all very different. I mean, between Lake of the Pines and LOP and, well, Pin Valley Cascade Shores, those are the main, and they're bigger facilities.
Right.
So anyway, just, it's impressive to look where it goes, but to know that there's always going to be upgrades that need to be done, even on those smaller facilities, and finding the funding to do that is different. I mean, I suppose there's opportunities like Pin Valley, we got grants to upgrade that one, but it's never ending. There's always some sort of upgrades that need to be done or to meet state or state regulation and water resources. So as much as we don't like to pay for some of these things, it's kind of a necessity.
And one thing to note with the rate study that we did do in 2021, it's working. So it's doing what it intended. It funded a lot of those projects. We're still reasonably within the areas that we thought we would be as far as fund balance projections, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. So it's doing what it was supposed to, which is going to allow us to fund more of those capital improvement projects with the rates we have in place for most zones.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad.
And I might add, if it's okay, Chair Hall, these fund balances too, all of these funds are necessary for cash flow, for just basic operation and maintenance, or they are part of planned improvements that we have to do. So I know some folks might look at that and go, oh, you have over $2 million in Lake Wildwood. That's all planned to be expended.
Yep, thank you. And yeah, again, great commendation for using our own staff, and, you know, you're increasing staff skills and ability and saving a whole lot of money. That was awesome. Any other board comments? Oh, go ahead.
Mic issues. Thank you so much for pointing it out. Just a quick piece. I know the lift stations and the generator projects were kind of or maybe were a direct result of some setbacks we had with some discharge activities from previous years. And I just had one question, just wanted the assurance that the budget before us reflects our ability to protect the creeks and the rivers and the areas that we discharge from, because I think from my perspective, that is the most important job that we do, right? And so we do a lot of things, but that is the most important. So just quick rhetorical question to you for that from your leadership perspective.
Thank you, Supervisor Bullock. And yes, this budget really represents the proper protection of our wastewater treatment plants, our whole collection systems, and our natural resources in the area. And I would remind folks too that the lift station improvements and the generator improvements, those are planned improvements. So this is before, you know, we have any issues. We actually have really good low rates of sewer overflows. And so any sanitation district has an overflow occasionally. You know, you can't predict everything, but I think our staff does an excellent job ensuring that we have as minimal as possible.
Just one more quick question related to kind of what Sue and Brad mentioned, the Gold Creek, there's basically, it doesn't even show up on that cash balance thing, and I think you mentioned, that's like one property. And that's in my district, right? Is that the corner of Altsir Drive and Ball Road? So it's just one complex that it's serving, and that's why there's no need for deep reserves, I guess.
Yeah, then that's correct. And it's a simple system. It's a gravity flow system to community leach field, so there's not a lot of, technology in that system or continued maintenance needed. So even our monitoring through the state is quarterly, so we're out there, once every 3 months to take readings and make sure that things are operating properly, and then we're doing like monthly checks. So it's not a fully staffed zone. So yeah, limited exposure, limited labor, which
It's almost like a supersized house or residential system. And so there's no cause for concern that even compared to North San Juan, there's no reserves there, but you don't foresee any reason why we would ever need that.
There's a little bit of reserves
Yeah.
in North San Juan. They have a single lift station. It's basically a community septic tank that pumps to a spray irrigation area as the final portion of the treatment. So again, very simple system. So we're not needing a tremendous amount of reserves. As Sue mentioned, or Supervisor Hook, eventually we'll want to look for expansion down there, and it's a property issue because there's just not available land to expand the process. So if it became available, we'd be able to expand and have more connections, which is a desire for that zone.
And at that point, it would be included in whatever rate survey was going on at the time, let's say.
Correct, yeah. And I would add in 2021, when we took a really good look at all of these districts, there's a slew of list of items that we need to improve or save for to do an improvement in the future. And as often, you have to prioritize. So we've completed a lot of improvements, but this next rate analysis, you're going to see there are other improvements that still need to be completed in every one of these districts.
Okay, open up to public comment. And Lorianne, are any callers on this one?
No callers, Chair.
Okay, I don't see anyone in the chambers, so we'll close public comment, bring it back to the board. Any final questions? Then I will be looking for a call for a motion of intent and a second to adopt the NCSD District 1 budget.
So moved.
I need a second.
Second.
Thank you.
District 5,
Yes.
District 2,
Yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 1.
Yes, wonderful, thank you. And now we're going to adjourn as the Nevada County Sanitation District 1 Board of Directors and reconvene as the Nevada County Board of Supervisors. And we'll go into our third and final item today in this special meeting. Public hearing to establish a revised consolidated user fee schedule for county departments. And Aaron, back to you.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Once again, Erin Mettler, Deputy County Executive Officer, Chief Fiscal Officer, pleased today to be joined by Senior Management Analyst Barry Anderson, as well as Chief Fiscal Administrative Officer Alicia Chachabadular for Community Development Agency. They are the true experts when it comes to the fee schedule. We are bringing this fee schedule update to you for adoption today. These proposed fees are included in your proposed budget, so to the extent you choose not to adopt the fees, we will be making adjustments to the budget. So just so that you understand the process, we are asking for a resolution to approve these fees at the end of the presentation. Also, there will be 2 resolutions, one for the user fee schedule and one for the traffic mitigation fees. With that, I will turn it over to Barry.
Thank you, Aaron. Chair Hall, Supervisors, again, my name is Barry Anderson, and I'm here today to present the fiscal year 25-26 consolidated user fee schedule proposal. So I'd like to start with a little bit of background. California counties have the authority to assess fees for services provided that said fees do not exceed the reasonable cost of providing the service or regulatory activity for which the fee is charged. and which is not levied for general revenue purposes. That's the language in the California Constitution. And in order to ensure that the fees collected or the fees in any proposed user fee schedule meet that legal criteria, Nevada County established the User Fee Review Group at the board's direction in 2015. We usually call that the UFERG because it's shorter than saying User Fee Review Group. Anyways, the UFERG consists of representatives from the Auditor Controller's Office, the County Council, and the County Executive Office, and is tasked with reviewing fee studies and proposals for reasonableness against that standard, excuse me, and making recommendations to the board for adoption of fee schedules, which is why we're here today. The process by which UFERG arrives at its recommendations to your board includes, among others, the following steps: performing fee studies, which analyze direct and indirect costs to develop hourly rates or other costs for fees; conducting time studies where required to track the time it takes for each fee activity for which an hourly rate is applied; identifying and addressing statutory authorities and other legal concerns; and analyzing fiscal impacts of proposed fees. And this process really ensures that the consolidated user fee schedule facilitates cost recovery where it is appropriate to do so without overcharging citizens for services, but it also allows for charging an amount that might be less than the full cost of delivering a service where accessibility to services is a priority and where it's appropriate and desirable to do so. In order to, as you might imagine, that process, which I just described, is fairly intensive, in order to mitigate the sort of administrative burden of conducting that while retaining adherence to the statutory requirement that fees not exceed the cost of providing services. In 2019, the UFERG recommended and the board approved the incorporation of an adjustment where appropriate to certain fees by a consumer price index, or CPI. This CPI-based adjustment may be waived or softened if at any time UFERG recommends and the board approves in order to ensure that fees remain reasonable. It's also worth noting that there are some fees identified in the fee schedule which do not receive CPI, either because they are statutory in nature and cannot be adjusted accordingly, or in certain cases, staff has recommended that they not be, that they don't feel it's appropriate to have a CPI adjustment. But having that adjustment as an option generally allows fees to increase as the cost of doing business increases over time without requiring that full fee study, which was previously described. This year, the UFERG would like to recommend that the authority be extended from a 3-year period to a 5-year period. It is the opinion of the UFERG that doing so represents minimal risk to exceeding the reasonableness standard, but also would create greater operating efficiencies throughout the county. But again, at the end of that 5-year period, fees would be required to go through that full, robust fee study process before having a new baseline established, before further CPI could be applied. The index that we use is the Urban Wage Earners and Clerical Workers in California, and the proposed CPI adjustment that would be used for certain fees is 2.87% based on that index. Excuse me. The proposed resolution before you today includes the following actions. It would reaffirm the board's intent for the UFERG to review and make recommendations to you for fee schedules. It would authorize the UFERG to adjust statutorily defined fees as needed. It would extend the CPI adjustment, as I just mentioned, from 3 years to 5 years. It reauthorizes phased increases for certain community development agency fees. Those were introduced last year in Resolution 24-298, and I will ask Alicia to describe that in a little more detail in a couple of slides, but just wanted to highlight that that is one of the actions in this resolution as well. And finally, it would rescind Resolution 24-298 and reestablish a new fee schedule. as summarized in the following table. So the update before your board includes the following changes over last year. We have comprehensive UFERG reviewed studies and new fee schedules for animal control and the sheriff. We have CPI-based adjustments for assessor, clerk of the board, CDA as mentioned, and treasurer tax collector. And, and for all other fees, there is no change recommended by the UFERG. So before I hand it over to Alicia, I just want to say that since the Community Development Agency really represents the largest share of fees on the fee schedule, and because the agency is the most dependent on cost recovery for operational sustainability, we like to just give a little bit more detail on the proposed fees here. As I mentioned, a full fee study, full UFERG reviewed comprehensive fee study was completed in 2024, just a year ago. And that fee study did identify significant increases that would have been needed at that time to do a full catch-up to the true cost of delivering certain services. The increases ranged from 6% to 19%. So in lieu of taking that approach, the resolution that was recommended to your board and adopted last year authorized a flat 5.13% increase to CDA fees with various add-ons that would be incorporated into the fee schedule for fiscal year 25-26, and in certain cases, others again in 26-27. Again, I will have Alicia speak to that in more detail. There are a handful of other additions, modifications, and deletions, which are enumerated in the attachment 1 document that should be part of your board package, but will also be addressed in the following slides. And then otherwise, the CPI adjustment will continue to apply to these fees throughout that requested CPI adjustment authority window of 5 years or less if the UFERG would like to conduct a new fee study before the end of that period. And so with that, I would like to pass it over to Alicia to speak about CDA fees.
Thank you, Barry. Good morning, Chair Hall and honorable supervisors. My name is Alicia Chattavadula. I'm the Chief Fiscal Admin Officer with Community Development Agency. So as Barry said, we are proposing our permit fees to be increased by the CPI plus the catch-up percentage that was pre-approved last year based on our fee study. This chart is really showing you what that catch-up percentage is per department in addition to the CPI. Excuse me. All of the departments do have a catch-up except for engineering. Their increase was very small last year. And the additional catch-up we're asking for in 26-27 is only going to be in code and cannabis. Their rates were the bigger 9% ones, so we're spreading that out over 3 years rather than 2 years. As Barry said, our building and planning and environmental health departments, they have the biggest revenue impacts from permit fees, and those increases will be from 3.7 to 4.25%. So just so you know, our building department is 100% fee-based. Our environmental health department is about 56% fee-based, and our planning department is 25 to 40% fee-based. And that really depends on the amount of private projects that they're working on versus some advanced planning work in each year. Are you doing slides? Okay. This is a slide of the new permit fees that we are proposing. First up is a new building fee, and this is based on the reduced number of inspections that are going to be required for the new owner-built limited density rural dwellings that this was brought to your board in January. That's that Title 25 fee. And the rest of them are environmental health. The first set of 5 fees, these are existing programs that we already have fees for, but these are just establishing specific program elements so that we can track them better. And the last 5 are new to start charging in 25-26, and these are for the SB 1383 organic waste generator inspections and reporting that is now required. There are 5 new fees, and it's basically to track them all at the different tier levels so we can have better reporting. But they're all for 1 hour, and this will be added to the annual consumer protection permits for all retail food facilities. Just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview for a building permit. So this is an example of an 1,800 square foot home. Trying to compare Nevada County to Placer and El Dorado. These are our current 24-25 rates. Most of our impact fees are not really going up, so there's not going to be a huge change on this. As you can see, Nevada County's overall permit cost is lower than Placer and El Dorado, and that's really because our impact and mitigation fees are lower. If you do look at the first line, you'll see that our building permits are higher than Placer County, but we are still quite a bit lower than El Dorado County. So just to make sure everyone understands, this is just a sample of the building permit fee only. If you were to build a new home, there'd be grading, water, sewer, many other permits that would be needed. So this is not a quote. And just to kind of give you a pie chart of this, you can see an overall 15% is all that is coming into community development for our staff time working on these types of permits. And so this next slide is just to talk about the separate resolution that we're requesting. That action is to approve no inflationary adjustment to our local and regional traffic mitigation fees. In April 2024, we came to your board with a Nexus study update for the local and regional traffic mitigation fees. That fee study approves automatic annual fee adjustments based on the San Francisco Construction Cost Index, and that CCI is a negative 0.66% this year. So the Regional Transportation Technical Advisory Committee got together. That's made up of Nevada City, Grass Valley, Town of Truckee, the county, and the Nevada County Transportation Commission. And they all agreed, the members agreed to just keep the flats rate. This was in consultation with the Nevada County Contractors Association also. So the request is to have no inflationary adjustment on those fees. And in that previous example I showed you, that would have been a $40 change if we did anything with that. And with that, I think we have any questions for Barry or I.
Thank you. Let's start with Sue this time. Questions?
I don't really have any questions. I mean, I understand how this all works. It's challenging to see what it costs to build a house. You know, here we're trying to build housing and then look, those fees go up. It's hard to look at. I just can't. I mean, I think if I'm any normal person, it's going to look at that, but I understand the work that goes into it. But like Title 25 and some of those things were created to make building easier, and that's a pretty significant jump in fees. But just saying, I'm sure you have that all worked out. I should have asked some more questions ahead of this meeting. So, and this is just we're going to see this again on the 24th, or is this going to get voted on today? And I do have a question. How come we don't do this before we do the budget?
We ask for adoption of the fees before we propose the budget.
So if we didn't, you'd have to go back and do changes before we come back on the 24th?
Right. These fees aren't effective.
I just am curious why we don't do it all ahead of time. Okay. Yeah, I don't really have any questions. It's just challenging every time we raise fees. I think that's just hard. I just look at, and I am kind of curious, how can we how do we choose this through an urban philosophy versus a rural philosophy? That's kind of a big one for me, because urban, is urban
I believe that is the most, it's the closest nexus to this area in terms of CPIs that are available on the Department of Consumer Affairs, or whichever website it is that we go to grab that information. That is the most closely aligned to this area, is the urban and clerical wage earners for the Bay Area.
Interesting. Okay, just curious with that, because we always look like where we are sitting as far as wages and stuff in the community. So just curious. Those are just a couple of the questions I had, how you come up with that with rural versus urban. I don't want to be urban, I want to be rural.
Understandable.
You're urban rural. I know, like, that is just it's just so weird how you come up with that. I mean, sometimes when we look at CPI to San Francisco versus here, I just find that just a little bit broken. Because we're different, we're rural. So with that, thank you. Good, I appreciate your presentation. I do hate to, I'm just overwhelmed.
It's never easy to want to create rates and have to see those increases, but, I mean, I think with the urban increases, it's really just a percentage increase, right? We're not taking our hourly rates based on San Francisco. We're taking that percentage increases, that's kind of.
So, but for now, we're going to be seeing, we're going to see a 5% increase over every year for the next, so that'll be until we see it again in 3 years instead of 5?
No, we're increasing our rate. The CPI was only 2.87% this year.
Okay.
And
Or did
the
we just-
catch-up this year for most of CDA departments is just a one-time. So after this year, except for code and cannabis, we'll be back to just CPI. So last year, we had a 5.13% increase, and that was because some of those calculations were 7, 8%, and we thought that that was too much to put onto our customers. So we didn't want to do it all at once. So we took a mean of those rate increases, came up with a 5%, and we're bringing back this year that little bit of catch-up.
Could you bring that slide back that has the changes in it?
Yeah.
Because my attachment, just for curiosity.
And if you're looking at code and cannabis increases, I know they seem a lot, but they're, like, the fines and things are not based on the hourly rate. It's really just their permits, and it's very low. It's like $200,000. So it's not a huge bulk of the revenue we bring in, unlike building that is 100% fee-based.
Okay, that was a good question. I know cannabis seems to get a hit no matter where it goes, you know?
Yeah.
So, but we're not making money in cannabis, obviously, at this point. but-
No, and if you look at their rates are much lower than many of the other departments. So if you kind of compare it on that, they hadn't had I mean, it was a new program. We didn't really have any data to do fee studies. So the last 2 fee studies we've done have finally had enough data to try to understand what it costs to run that program.
Okay, so this will just do a true-up then to now, and then they'll just see that regular CPI for the next 3 years, and then we'll see it again.
Correct, except for code and cannabis, they'll come in next year with a CPI plus that 2.82 for code and CPI plus 3.5 for cannabis. One more catch-up next year in 26, 27, and then everyone is CPI.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to note, I mean, it's still not that helpful, but the percentages look so large, but when you look at the actual dollar amounts, they don't look like they're going to break somebody depending on how many hours are needed. So that's a little bit helpful. But Lisa, you have any questions, comments?
Just a couple of comments. You know, I share Sue's concerns about increasing fees, especially having to do with housing, because we are trying to get people to, you know, build here. In particular, the Title 25 fee, which is a new fee. I mean, Title 25 is to try and bring people into compliance that don't necessarily meet all the regular building requirements. And now they're going to see this very large fee and probably not want to go through the process to come into compliance. So I think that's one of the probably unintended consequences when you start looking at raising fees for things that we're trying to do to really help people who potentially are on some sort of a limited income. Obviously, I understand the need. We need to cover our costs of doing work. And then the current, so the proposed fees, some like for example, the planning fee, not necessarily raising the fee, you're changing, instead of it taking 4 hours to do something, your minimum charge is going to be 8 hours to do something. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I don't have a slide on those change
Yeah.
fees, but.
I have it in front of me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Basically, all of those planning fees are time and materials, so most everyone is paying much more than the minimum fee. So the idea of charging a minimum fee when the person comes in is to not have the huge one-time lump payment that will really impact them. And then as the project progresses, which can take a very long time, they're paying, like you would a lawyer or anyone, you pay time and materials as it happens. For some of those bigger fee types, they wanted to increase that minimum deposit, just so we get enough in to actually get some of the base stuff done in the beginning. So that's the real changes on those. And to go back to your question about the Title 25 building fee, that's a lower fee than someone coming in for a full building permit. So if you look at that first slide, where the building permit was about $3,200, you can see that one's $1,700. So it's going to have less inspections, it's going to have its restrictions and all, but it is much lower to help that out.
No, I understand that. It's just, we're trying, there's a lot of people who probably have Title 25 properties in our county, and to try and get them to come in and, get permitted for the work that they do. I just think that's a little bit of a deterrent for people when they see that fee. But again, I understand the reason for doing it. And so when you say time, and, they charge based on the time. So for example, if I came in for a use permit for a development agreement, and it only took 4 hours, you're not going to charge me for the 8 hours if it only took 4 hours. You're still going to charge the hourly rate?
No, it's charged the 8-hour minimum.
So
That's based on the averages, and
that's
then
the new
anything
minimum.
over and above that, we bill out. So they track their time in our land use software system, and we send monthly billing out to all of our customers.
Okay. Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that I've had some experience with, and I think Tricia's been great at doing this, is bringing people in for initial consultation, which we don't typically charge for, so that they know up front, all the various fees and what things are going to be before they make the determination to actually spend money to start a project. And I think that that's a really useful tool for helping people understand what our process is and what the fees are. I also appreciate the comparisons with the other counties, and when, especially like you look at how much higher our school fee is than the others, and that's just I think that's just it's because of our population. We don't have as big a population as those other, but the needs are the same and the costs are the same for building a school. It's just in Placer County, it's divided out under a much larger segment of building. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the summary. Just a couple of quick questions on the code enforcement fee. Just based on our process, so there's a complaint comes in and code enforcement goes out and inspects a property. Who pays that fee? Is that just levied on the actual offender, or how do we collect it? Or
If there's a property that gets a fine, it goes to the homeowner.
so the person who has the complaint
Against
lodged
them.
against them. So
Yes.
code goes out and finds somebody with some deficiency. We send them a bill just for the time that we put into the investigative process?
No, the investigative process is part of the general fund that comes to code enforcement. This is more when people don't come into compliance, if they have to send them fines. And I probably shouldn't speak to this exactly. Maybe you want Matt Kelly to
We have
give the
Director
exact
Kelly
on how
that
they
could come
do
and
it.
answer
Yeah.
some of these questions if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
There's two different kinds of code compliance pieces.
Hi, Supervisor Bullock, Chair Hall, members of the Board of Supervisors, Matt Kelly, Director of Code and Cannabis Compliance. So our citations are based on state statutes. And so we have first level, second level, and third level citations that we issue to the property owner. And so the responsible party or the property owner typically will receive those citations. We do have the ability to charge an hourly rate to the property owner as well, and we do that sometimes. And so that's just to cover our staff costs for the investigation and for dealing with the property owner. We normally don't do that unless we're issuing citations. If the property owner is willing and comes into compliance, then we won't charge that hourly rate. But it is kind of case dependent, and it's a bit of a case by case basis.
Okay. Yep, you answered my question. Thank you.
Welcome.
On the cannabis side, I think I'm still just a little bit unclear. So the permit process has fees associated with gaining a permit. at this point, because we're doing CPI catch-up, supplemental catch-up, is that just because we have such a small data set on what it costs us to run that program because it's new? We're just kind of basically doing, looking at it, adding up that cost and kind of dividing it over our total outlay and then saying, okay, well, we're not necessarily meeting our needs right now, we have to change that fee?
Well, the fee stays, the annual fees were based on so many hours of work to perform that work, so the hourly rate that gets into that calculation, it was a new department, we didn't know their full overhead, they weren't even getting charged like cost plan charges in the beginning, so as services were used and all those catch-ups started to hit their department, their cost increased. So taking those indirect costs and putting that onto where you get an hourly rate that actually recoups the cost for those services is why you're seeing that big jump, because you started kind of very low without having any of those costs associated yet.
Got it, okay, thanks. And I think also because the price is down and we don't have a whole bunch of applicants going into the system, it's probably affecting our total cost, right? Because that would be dispersed over the whole marketplace, but right now the marketplace is pretty small. And so that's all affecting it.
Yeah, and I think that's what you have as an issue with a small rural county in general, right? You only have so many widgets to spread your indirect cost over. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What's the recreational health complaint fee? I don't know what that is. I'm not familiar with that.
I think that Amy is on Teams if you want to ask her specifically, but I believe that's if somebody calls for the complaint, say about a pool or something that's a public recreation area.
Oh, I see, okay.
Where they permit the pool, if they have to go out and inspect it again.
Okay, thanks. And then just the Title 25, the 1754, I would definitely agree with you both. I think it's hard when we work so hard to reduce the cost of housing and then that fee. A Title 24 dwelling versus a traditional dwelling, in my mind, they're not even comparable. They're so different in what you're asking those people to kind of live in, the living standard of the dwelling, but also trying to get $1,717 for those. And I would just throw it out to the board that if there's another way to look at that and continue to keep that low or lower that in an effort to keep people moving through the process and or prevent homelessness or underhoused people, in my mind, that is a ripe, very small figure for us, but potentially big impact. And I know that Title 25, we talked about this on the ad hoc, is not a widely utilized program because we made recent changes to it. So I don't even know, I think at one point we were talking about 55 of them, and I don't even know how many there are now, or maybe they're popping up a bunch. But it seems like if we were looking at keeping fees low, I would support keeping that fee low or lowering it, just as a matter to keep people in those houses and encourage them to take advantage of that program. We did a lot of work to permission those. And then I just wanted to bring up one piece on the building and the building fees. I'm a recent consumer of the building department, and I have to say that my experience has been outstanding. Just going through the system, the fees are considerable, but when you compare them to building costs, they're really is a portion of building costs. They're not extraordinary in my mind. If you're actually taking that kind of activity, they're not substantial. Building, planning, and environmental health, all from at least my perspective, were fast. I could go into Acela and I could see where all that program cost was going. And there's a lot of activity that goes on in the background to get something permitted. And I'll also mention that some of the towns and cities also have their own permit fee structures that a lot of my constituents mistakenly call me and say, we want to talk to you about the town fees. And there's been a big process improvement in Truckee to try and understand the impact of those fees and the service quality. So just putting my supervisor hat on, from a balanced approach, I think we do a great job right now, balancing the provision of service and the fees we charge and what the customer gets, in my personal opinion, being inside the system and also seeing it from this chair. So just want to pass it along. I appreciate that very much, and I hope others in that building and planning realm appreciate it also, because I think the counterpoint to that is a lot of difficulty that's seen in other organizations and other jurisdictions. It doesn't quite happen as well as I think Nevada County is doing right now. That's it for me.
Just one question, because when we look at code compliance, I'm just kind of curious, because one of the issues I see is sometimes it's, you guys go out and where's that funding come for all the frivolous complaints that you get made? That's a big issue, or ones that you get called out and out over the same one and there's really not a problem. Just if you'd address that, how you fund that.
Chair Hall, Supervisor Hook. So the department is mostly general funded. And so the way our zoning code is set up and our administrative enforcement ordinance is set up, we don't necessarily have to enforce our code if it is a continual violation that we have deemed or found unfounded. And so we will try to work with the reporting party or the property owner as many times as we can to clarify that there is no violation and try to get them to work it out amongst themselves as it becomes more of a civil issue. We will mediate, or not really mediate, we'll meet with the property owner or the reporting party and try to have meetings together with them. But we are using general fund money to do that. We can invoice the property owner if it's becoming an issue, but we generally try to not do that unless we actually have a viable code violation case.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, thank you for that, the report. It's nice going last because I think everything I was going to say has been said. I think there's broad consensus up here. Just a couple things I would say. To Hardy's point, I think you're right, and I agree with you, and the great job the building department does. I think a ground-up development is a little more, the cost skyrockets. If you bring up that slide 12 or page 12, yeah, the one before, yeah. That's just for the building permit, and I think Hardy's point's right on, particularly for like deck remodels or that. When you're building ground up, though, I think somebody mentioned it, we're then talking about grading permit, and then when you expand that to a actual development, which is what I think we're trying to encourage for to address the affordable housing issue, the costs do become astronomical. But I agree with everything that's been said. And I think going forward, maybe this isn't the time, it seems like there's broad consensus to really focus, not that you haven't been, on trying to streamline the process or trying to bring the cost down of building ground up particularly. But I'm going to pick my hill to die on because, as has been mentioned, this small CPI increase in the building permit is a very small part of the total cost. I think with my math, maybe $150 is added, not to discount that, it's $150, but compared with the $25,000 building permit fees and then the grading, it is small. So I think we need to address the process, and I realize a lot of it comes from the state, the mandates and that. So it's a different issue. Otherwise, I agree with everything that's been said, but I'll look forward to that conversation because I think it's critical as we address affordable housing. I did have one question sort of related on the attachment one, and Lisa brought it up. So where we increase the base rate from, let's say, 4 hours to 8 hours, the minimum, I think you answered her, so they don't get a refund, but that increase is based on time after time, people go well beyond the minimum, so it's not going to be very likely that somebody would not meet that minimum. Is that a correct characterization?
Yeah, when we were increasing those minimum hours, it's really based on a time study.
Yeah.
So switching something from 4 to 8 hours, the average is probably about, well, except for the mine, the average is way up there.
Yeah.
We send out monthly bills to all of our customers constantly, so it's many more hours. So 8 hours is more of a minimum to get through the initial, work that has to be done before you really get into what any differences would be on that.
Yeah, and I've experienced as a consumer, it'd be great if you met below the minimum, but it rarely happens. The last thing I would add on that, at some point, it seems like 4 hours was, I'm just taking the first one, for example, which is use permits development agreement. 4 hours maybe was reasonable minimum. Does that mean that the process is getting, I think I know the answer to the question, increasingly more time-consuming? And actually, you don't even have to answer that. I think it has, but I guess wrapping it up to my broader point, I'd love to see us address the processes to where instead of increasing the minimum amount, people are spending less time, less money. But otherwise, as far as the issue at hand, I recognize the need as a proprietary enterprise business unit to fund itself. And I think this increase in fees, even though none of us want to increase fees, is minimal related to the total cost, and it's necessary. And I feel like the qualification that it needs to be reasonable, what was it, reasonable and prudent or whatever, I feel comfortable that the people that are looking at that, including the auditor controller, would vouch for that. So that's all I had.
Okay, thank you. I'll just add, not going to say a lot more. This is one of the hard parts of our jobs, but it's one of our responsibilities to vote for a budget, and that often includes price increases. So none of us want to increase the cost to our constituents, but it's our responsibility to create a balanced budget. And if we don't have fees that pay for the staff time, then we have to take that money from somewhere else, because that money has to be put into that staff time. We just talked about potentially putting more into paying off the pensions. Where's that going to come from? If we, subsidize fees more than we have already, that has to come from somewhere else. So it's part of our job to take these hard votes to ensure that we're having some input in where we're trying to provide relief to our customers and constituents, but we must end up with a balanced budget. So just to go back to the fees that we'd like to see lower. So we demanded a lower, and I led that charge, we demanded a lower fee for ADUs. We demanded a lower fee for cannabis when they started out. That might have been before your time. Try to help people in these new programs and help people who are suddenly having these expenses they didn't expect. And so we eventually have to make that up. And so that's part of, what we're doing here too. Kudos to my colleagues for the good questions and to all of you for doing the fee studies. But I'm sorry we have to vote for increases, but we're simply paying staff to do the job that we need them to do. And again, that money has to come from somewhere. So we're here making the hard choices upon the recommendations of staff for how to make that happen. So I'm going to open it up for public comment. Any callers, Loriana?
No callers, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Since I said all that, I'm going to bring it back to the board for any final comments, if you want to make any final comments.
On the Title 25 piece, based on the limited number of total program participants, I would make a motion to support the fees. If we have other comments, that's great. Let's move on. But I would support those fees with a reduction in the Title 25 to under $1,000, and then request the staff to come back and give us a metric 1 year from today.
How much budget, can I ask a question to your motion? How much budget adjustment would you need to do if we lowered that fee down to less than that, like a $995?
So we would have to want to come back to the board with those numbers. So we need to consult with council. If we were going to pull that fee out, then the board could vote with intent to approve the other fees. That's what I'm hearing. And then come back to the board at a later date, giving the board some options. Is that what I'm hearing?
So that would be different than the motion that was on the table, but I would recommend that being a better option. So if there is not a second for Hardy's motion, then that motion dies and we can move to a different motion to pull that fee, I think is how we do it.
My motion was to adopt the fee schedule as presented and change the Title 25 fee to less than $1,000. I would propose $995, and assume the fiscal impact of that was some sort of minor in the scheme of things impact on the budget, and then have the metrics or a measurement of how much that program cost delivered back to the board in a year. That program itself, even with the entire Title 25 participation, was less than 55 units. So we're talking just in napkin math, just rounded around, not very much money. So
But
that's what I'm saying.
So I want some clarification. So you're wanting to give them the rate right now?
Yeah. It just
Okay.
seems like a lot of-
This came from a rate study. I just want to say they did a rate study to come to us with this study, so.
But our job is, like you pointed out,
So-
to make fees that are applicable for the board.
Okay, so we're going to provide some pathways for you.
Yeah, please.
So I'm hearing from council, your options are, if we do adjust the rate, specifically just for that one item, you would have to give a specific amount now for it to go to vote. What I need to get clarification from council, if we pull that one out, have it go back to staff, you will also have to have another fee study as well as public hearing, and then that will come back at a later date, which we're happy to do. But I will rely on council for clarifying that process.
Yeah, I believe if it's not going to be a new fee today, because it would be a new fee, you would need at least a public hearing and some representation of why it's set at that number.
Which we're happy to do, but we just want to make sure that the board understands in terms of what that looks like moving forward.
So I think what you're saying is we can't just pick an arbitrary number today without having the backup for what, because we actually could come back and say, we're going to waive that fee for, I mean, there's some other options there. But I think the question I would have is, how many applications do you get per year for Title 25? Do you know? George, we're bringing everybody into it today.
So Chair Hall, I also have a recommendation too. So we could
Yeah,
move
this is
forward.
not how we should be doing this with a motion on the table. So go ahead, Allison.
Kill the motion.
Yeah, can we kill, I did not see a second. We're going to kill the motion. Let's come back and discuss what our options are. But first, go ahead, George.
Good morning, Chair, Supervisors. George Shirk, Building Director here in Nevada County. We right now do not have, well, let me back up. We have less than 5 new Title 25 applicants. We have several that we're working with on code compliance that were unpermitted earlier. So that $1,700 fee does not go to that. Those are only new construction fees. So you're talking about 55, one a week or so. We're probably not going to be anywhere near that for new construction on Title 25 houses. Like we talked about a couple months ago when this was going through the process, we're thinking this is going to help the code compliance person rather than the new construction, and that's what it's turned out to be so far.
Thank you for that clarification, because that makes a huge difference. If you've got people already in the process or coming in for the process, they don't pay the fee. It's only for new construction.
They'll pay a fee. It won't be the new construction fee. It'll be based on time and inspections.
Okay.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay. So back to the board. Is there a motion for, to adopt the fee study as presented?
I would make a motion, not that motion, but I will make a motion. I will make a motion that we adopt the fees study, removing this fee and bringing it back at a later date with more clarification and more understanding of what a reduced cost would be.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Before we do a roll call, I'm going to ask for additional comments and conversation about this.
So that's an option. Talking with council, another option that may be helpful in terms of this process would be you could adopt as is and then direct staff to come back with the Title 25 reduction. That way the fees move forward. It gives them time for public hearing. So that would be a secondary option if you want to consider that amendment.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? So an applicant who joined the process after we adopt today, for example, somebody who came in tomorrow would be subject to $1,717?
I believe there's a 60-day period before the fees come into effect. So it would be 60 days from July 1st, I believe, when they would kick in.
Do we think we could turn around the staff information back to the board within that 60-day period?
It needs, how long is the public hearing? It needs to go out for 30 days noticing and then 2 weeks. 10 days.
I mean, if staff could do it, legally, you could certainly do it within 2 months.
So
Okay, Sue wants some clarification. I'm just going to add in here, point of personal privilege. To my mind, this is going to cost us a lot of money. They've already done a fee study. We either accept their fee study or we don't. I am not in favor of this. It's going to cost a lot of money to make some changes for potentially 5 people with some arbitrary fee study that they're going to have to do to come up with a lower rate. So I just want us to think about that as we're spending time on this. But, okay, Sue, your turn.
I just want some clarification. So we were talking, the 1,700 is more for people that already have their house built, and they come in to do an as-built under Title 25?
No.
Because it's a code compliance, right? You built a house without permits, and you got a code compliance, and I just want to see what the difference is.
So if you come in and you want to build a residential structure in the rural areas, right? Because this is only for zoning in the rural areas, right? So if you come in for new construction, that's when the 1717 would be charged to you. If you've already done something in these rural areas and you want to bring it up, you want to come in and get permitted under Title 25, that's more of a time and material, or time spent with staff on your plans and on your inspections to get through the process. So a lot of times that would be lower if you work through the process with us, but if you drag it out over time, it may be more expensive depending on how many times you come in and deal with staff.
And then can you pull that up just real quick? So what's a regular, when we just show what the regular cost is for building permit? So that's half of that. 53% of that. Okay. I feel better.
Right. Let's see, is there clarification, Allison?
Yes, consulting with your agency head and your budget analysis, we believe that we could bring it back. It would not require another fee study. We would just bring back a board item that would reflect how you would subsidize that fee with general fund. And we believe it would be under $10,000 on the projections that you heard from your building director.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to do a whole new fee study. It's just basically how are you going to fund those permits that you're going to get if it's a less dollar amount than what the fee study was.
That is correct, and we're estimating under $10,000.
I would agree with that based on the number of permits that are pulled.
Okay, is there more discussion? Otherwise, we can go to a vote on that motion, which you want to state that again, Lisa?
Sure, I move that we approve the fee study as presented, with the exception of the bringing back for further discussion, the item on the Title 25. Is that something that can come back to us on the 24th?
We could definitely bring it back in July, so we'll aim for the first meeting in July.
Okay.
And Trevor, is that an acceptable way to do the motion?
Yeah, I just, so long as it's clear in the record that the motion is to adopt the resolution as is, with the one edit that in Exhibit or Attachment A, the Title 25 residence base fee is excluded.
Okay, so that's the motion that's on the table with a second. Are we ready for a vote, or is there any more discussion? Okay, Loriana, please call the vote.
District 5.
Yes.
District 2.
Yes.
District 4.
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 1.
Yes. Okay. Are we done? Holy moly. We have one more
we have the
motion.
mitigation.
Yeah. So now we have need to vote on a resolution to approve no inflationary adjustment for the 25-26 local traffic mitigation fees and regional transportation mitigation fees for all districts.
So moved.
Second.
District 5,
Yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 2.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to start over.
Yep.
District 5,
Yes.
District 2,
Yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 1.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much.